In the beginning, the Son was Eloah. The son of El was both with El, and the son of El was Eloah.
Here at the Unexpected Cosmology, and probably any time in my life, it was a discovery that came while Rob, Michael, and I were reading from what we would call the Targum, the Hebrew Targum, meaning the Targum just means a translation. We are reading a English translation from a Hebrew text, and Ronit is reading along in the actual Hebrew. She's reading from the actual document, and we get to the end of it, and she's like, guys, that's not what it's saying. And she took us through it. And so, Ronit, I would like to bring you on right now. We've been talking throughout the week, and she's been kind of digging a little bit further, clarifying some things. And I'm curious if you would like to just quickly, she can't stay later tonight. She has to go within the next 30 minutes. So that's why we're bringing her on now. And perhaps you can take us through some of what you found last week.
Sure. And okay. Sorry. So I'm going to drop the updated PDF, and just let me know if you can see it.
It's there.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So on Thursday, Noel pretty much went through almost everything that I explained. So I explained the root for the word proshim is pei resh shin, as you can see in the PDF, and apparently that root can, depending on punctuation and context, it can mean a plethora of things in Hebrew, anywhere from horseman all the way to excrement. It's just like, it's amazing how complex Hebrew can sometimes be. So then what I did is I produced a literal translation of John Hebrew manuscript, and it was very apparent that it's not the Roman soldiers that actually led the debacle of, dressing, undressing Yeshua, mocking him, beating him, and then putting him on the cross. It was actually a combination of the leaders of the Jewish community at the time. It was a combination of the priests, first and foremost, then the scribes, then the elders and sages, and then of course the people. And there is a certain word that is used to refer to the people. It's am, am. And in Hebrew, when you say am, when you say the, like ha'am, which means the nation, it's very clear we are talking about the Jews. Okay, we are not talking about foreigners or anyone. So basically, the complete process of that was executed on Yeshua was led by the leaders of the people and by some of the people. So I also explained that in the document you can see that they didn't have a vocabulary for cross and crucifixion. So they used the word shti va'erev, which means in Hebrew warp and woof, but literally what it means is like crossing of vertical lines with horizontal line. And so that's how they call the cross in Hebrew. So then I also, on page 2, I put a literal translation of Matthew. What I'm finding when I looked at the 4 different manuscripts, Matthew is the most detailed one. He goes into a lot of details. John and Luke are kind of the cliff notes, they are like quickly, not going into a lot of details, but Matthew and Luke definitely go into more details. And one of the things that I discovered, and I contacted Noel about it, is that I feel like it's the second bombshell next to the first bombshell. So when I read, once I was done with the Hebrew translation of Matthew, I kind of like put a square around it so you can see it on page 2. So verse 27 says basically that they took Yeshua to the great courthouse. I literally translated it, but what it actually means in Hebrew is Sanhedrin. Okay. So that kind of blew my mind. When I saw that verse, I was kind of shocked. So for me, I grew up in an Orthodox environment, so I know exactly what it means when someone takes you to the Sanhedrin. That means you are going to be tried. You don't just go there just to have a guided tour. Okay, this is just serious. If you are led to that area. So Noel already read all of this on Thursday, so I don't want to read everything. I just want to focus on the discovery that I made with verse 27, that they took Yeshua to the Sanhedrin. That really bothered me because that meant to me that a few more things happened. In between, Pilate handing Yeshua to the Jews until he was actually crucified. So then I looked at Mark and Luke, and Luke really matches John. He really goes quickly through the description. Mark gives a few more details. So what I did on page 3, you can see that I translated just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses from Mark, just to give you an idea that Mark is using exactly the same terminology as Matthew, as far as he's starting by saying that that whoever is referred to as they are the most supreme priests, the sages, the scribes, and the elders. Okay, so that's how Matthew described them. And after he details that, then from that moment on, both Matthew and Mark just refer to them as they. Okay, so in verse 18, Mark actually goes even more detailed than the whole group of those important people, and he points to the Pharisees and he says that they took him to the temple. Like in Hebrew it says Hechal HaShoter. So when I looked at it, I thought, this is so weird. Hechal is definitely the temple, okay, but HaShoter, that kind of like didn't make sense to me. So then I started researching it, and I found out that HaShoter was also another way of saying HaSofer. And HaSofer in Hebrew is basically a scribe. And then I started digging a little bit more. I thought, what does it mean, temple of HaSofer? And then it dawned on me when I started reading that, remember that the person that led the Yehudim back from Babylon to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, his name is Ezra HaSofer. Okay, he was a scribe. And he is considered, in Judaism, he is considered the second most important personality after Moses in the Bible. This is how elevated he is. So when I dug into it, I found out that in those days, many times they referred to the second temple as Temple of HaSofer, referring to basically Ezra. because he was the one that led the building of the second temple. So in my humble opinion, I think what Mark was referring to is basically they took him back to the area of the temple. Okay. So I think in a very gentle way, Mark was saying the same thing that Matthew was saying. He just didn't say Sanhedrin. So then I started investigating about the Sanhedrin, and I added special notes, and I want to read everything right now so we can go over it together. Okay, so there were two classes of rabbinical Jewish courts, which were called Sanhedrin, the Great Sanhedrin and the Lesser Sanhedrin. A lesser Sanhedrin of 23 judges was appointed to sit as a tribunal in each city, but there was only supposed to be one great Sanhedrin of 71 judges, which among other roles acted as the Supreme Court, taking appeals from cases which were decided by lesser courts. According to Talmudic sources, including the Tractate Sanhedrin, the Great Sanhedrin was a court of 71 sages that met in the Lishkat Hagazit, chamber of the hewn stones, in the temple. The Sanhedrin was always located close to the tabernacle or the temple. In Moses' time, it was near the entrance to the tabernacle. In later times, it was seated in a special chamber inside the temple compound. The Talmud deduces that it was built into the north wall of the temple in Jerusalem, half inside the sanctuary and half outside, with doors providing access both to the temple and to the outside. The name presumably arises to distinguish it from the buildings in the temple complex used for ritual purposes, which had to be constructed of unhewn stones. So why 71? Yah told Moses, "Gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel." Moses presided over them, as the verse continues, "and they shall stand there with you." Thus, the 70 judges plus Moses equals 71. Once Moses passed away, the judge with the greatest knowledge was appointed in his stead, called the Nasi. He would sit at the head of the court. To his right sat the Av Bet Din. And by the way, Bet Din is exactly the words that Matthew was using, the great Bet Din, which is the Sanhedrin. The second greatest judge who was appointed as the Nasi's assistant. The remaining 69 would sit before them, arranged according to age and stature. The wiser the judge, the closer he would be seated to the Nasi. It was a religious legislative body, whence the law or halakha goes out to all Israel. Politically, it could appoint the king and the high priest, declare war, and expand the territory of Jerusalem and the temple. Judicially, it could try a high priest, a false prophet, a rebellious elder, or an errant tribe. Reminding you that Yeshua was considered a false prophet by the Pharisees. At this point, we can safely assume that he was tried, convicted, and executed by the sages within the grounds of the temple. And just from my experience, I recall growing up in a religious education, I recall vividly when I was in middle school that we were taught about Yeshu. They would not call him Yeshua, by the way. They always dropped the A and they called him Yeshu. So we were taught about Yeshu being a false prophet that was tried and excommunicated for eternity from the Jewish nation by the sages. So I I feel, for me, with my background, when I read those two verses in Matthew and in Mark, I I cannot understand it any other way. They took him to the Sanhedrin and they probably tried him. And then once they were done, they went through the whole process of, heartbreaking process of what they did to him. But the whole process was definitely led by the highest ranking people in the community at that time.
Thank you. That was good detective work. Very good detective work. And I can only assume that the reason why this trial is not broadcasted in any of the scriptures was that there were just outside of the actual Sanhedrin, there were no witnesses to it. Like, it was just, he was taken in there and nobody knew what really happened, other than the fact that he came out and they killed him. So that was excellent. And was there anything else? I know you have to leave soon. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's it. Everything was in the PDF.
Okay, excellent. Now, we have a lot to get to tonight, and we can, of course, we can refer back to this throughout the night, and when we have our roundtable discussion at the end. But I thought we could turn it over to Rob now, and you can start reading from John chapter 20. And thank you again, Ronit. Rob, are you among
I am
the
ready.
living?
Thank you, Ronit. That was excellent. Great stuff when we can discover things and see what's being revealed to give us better understanding of what's taken place and see the meaning and impact of what we discover. I'm going to start with John chapter 20. I'll be reading through, I believe, verse 19 or 18, and then hand it over to Michael. So the first day of the week is the morning. Miriam Magdalene came to the grave, but it was still night, and she saw the stone of the grave overturned. Therefore she ran and came to Simon Kepha and to that other Talmud whom Yeshua loved exceedingly. And Miriam said to them, "They have taken my Adon away from the grave, and I do not know where they put him." So Kepha departed, and that Talmud whom was loved, and they came to the grave. Now they both went in a run, but the Talmud who was loved went faster, and came to the grave first. And he bowed his face, and saw the linen sheet placed at the one side. However, he did not enter there. Then Shimon Kepha, who went after him, came and went into the grave. And he saw the linen cloths placed at the other side. But the linen sheet which was placed on the head of Yeshua was not placed with the linen sheets, but was at one side folded. Then the Talmud who was loved, who came to the grave first, went in there, and he saw it, and ran away. For they did not understand the scripture which says that he must return to life after death. Then the Talmud went again into the same place, where they were before. But Miriam stood outside the grave, weeping. So while she was weeping, she bent down and looked into the grave. And she saw two messengers sitting, clothed with white, one at the head and one at the feet, at the place where the body of Yeshua Mashiach had been placed. And they said to that woman, "Why are you weeping?" So she said, "Because they have taken away my Adon from here, and I do not know where they have placed him." And when Miriam Magdalene had spoken these words, she turned about and saw Yeshua standing on his feet, and she did not realize that it was Yeshua. But she said in herself that he was the thief. So she said to him, "Adon, if you took him away, tell me where you have placed him, that I may carry him away unto me." Then Yeshua said to her, "Miriam." So she turned about and said to him, Rabbi. Then Yeshua said to her, Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my Talmidim and say to them that I will ascend unto my Father and unto your Father, my Eloah and your Eloah. So Mary Magdalene went and made it known to the Talmidim, saying, I saw him, and he spoke these things to me. So I will end it there, and we will discuss this section. I'll pass it over to Michael.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you. I cannot believe we made it to the end of John. This is awesome. I'm going to start my commentary today on, let's see, very first one. So I'm going to read both. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. And then in the Hebrew, the first day of the week in the morning, Miriam Magdalene came to the grave, but it was still night, and she saw the stone in the grave overturned. And as Mike D pointed out, I just want to again highlight the difference from that we noticed in John 19, the difference between the grave and the sepulchre. And I'm asking the question, and I'm assuming the stone of the grave, is that considered like a tombstone now? So is that literally what happened? And we built it into this whole huge cave system. But it was literally just a tombstone, and that's what was knocked down. I don't know. And then I also want to talk about, so I was doing a word study on John 20, and what stuck out is that word week. So in the Greek, the first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early. That word for week is actually Sabbaton. It's Sabbath. So I'm assuming if it's the first day of the week, it's at sunrise. So it's or sunset, sorry. First day of the week, at sunset, after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene came. So maybe you guys have more info on that, but it's literally Sabbaton. The second one is number 2. I'm just going to read the Greek. Then she runneth and cometh to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and saith unto them, They have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him. And I just want to highlight that, Mary, she had no idea of Yeshua's resurrection and thought his grave was robbed. And then if you do research, that was very common during that time. So that's why in my opinion, that's why she was surprised, besides the not knowing of the resurrection. 2 more, and I'll hand it off to Noel. Number 4, I'm going to read the Hebrew. It says, now they both, and this is just comical, now they both went in a run, but the Talmud, who was loved, went faster and came to the grave. And I've seen memes on this, but I just think it's really funny that the one who self-proclaimed to be loved and the one who allegedly wrote this book said he beat Peter to the grave and put it in his own book. I think that's hilarious if true. And then finally, this was pretty cool. Number 12, I'll read both. So, and seeth 2 angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And in the Hebrew, and she saw 2 messengers sitting, clothed with white, one at the head and one at the feet, at the place where the body of Yeshua HaMashiach had been placed. I just have 2 cross references of when 2 angels appeared to people. So Acts 1:10, and as they were gazing intently into the sky while he was going, then behold, 2 men in white clothing stood beside them. So gazing into the sky, and then 2 men in white clothing beside them. And then Ezekiel 9:2, and as they were gazing intently into the sky, hey, wouldn't you know, while he was going, then behold, 2 men in white clothing stood beside them. I just thought that was a cool cross-reference of 2 angels coming, and it links up to John 20:12. And I've got a few more, but I'll hand it off to Noel.
Yeah, one of the things as I was reflecting on this chapter this week was trying to picture this scene in a completely new light based on what we saw in John chapter 19, but also contextually within this chapter. Now, this is one of those things where you kind of have to take all 4 gospels together. And this is when I had Ronit give her a presentation and write her. I didn't expect her to write out a paper like that. That was great. But I asked her specifically to check the other 4 gospels to see if they matched up. And of course they did. Now here in the Gospel of John, the chapter 19, the last verse is like, he's buried and Sabbath is coming. And then all of a sudden, the next verse is the first day of the week in the morning. Mary Magdalene. It almost looks like he's put down there during the night, and then he resurrects within like 24 hours. I mean, it's pretty quick, and that's how it reads in this. And this is where I would say, well, let's look at the other three Gospels, which I'm not going to do tonight. And I always have the opinion, and I could be totally wrong in this, but I have the opinion that there were actually 2 Sabbaths between his death and resurrection. Now, I know that those are fighting words for some people of a certain calendar, but I actually am of the opinion that he was buried right before the high Sabbath of the first day of unleavened bread. And then there was a day between that was a work day, which is what we would call on the pagan calendar Friday. And then there was Sabbath. And you notice what's interesting here, it says that it's the first day of the week when she's coming, but it's still nighttime. The sunrise hasn't happened yet. And this also will, open up a can of worms depending on who you're talking to. Welcome to Torah, as I tell everyone when it comes to the calendar. That's all I can say. Welcome to Torah, because people argue about this. But it says it's the first day of the week, and it's still night. It's still dark out. To me, that's kind of a clue when the day officially begins at sunset. At least that's when I create it. I could be wrong about that, but a verse like this reads that to me. And again, I am of the opinion that he actually rose from the dead with 3 complete days, a Sabbath, a non-Sabbath, and another Sabbath, and that he rose from the dead before sunset, and that, he followed the model of not doing work at nighttime. Again, so I think he was kind of chilling around there through the nighttime hours, and at whatever time. We really don't know at what time she got there, but she got there during the night and she sees him there. All right. I do think it's comical, as Michael pointed out, that in the Hebrew, John still runs faster. That's one of the things I was looking for. It still reads the same. He still beat him down. Now, the other thing that I've been really looking at is, because it was kind of a mind-blowing moment, recognizing that this doesn't actually talk about a sepulcher. And I was like, well, is that just a little, historical translation difference or something like that? Like, maybe they didn't have the word for a sepulcher. Maybe a grave is still a sepulcher, right? And I'm asking myself, well, was he literally put into the ground? Where was this stone, that was put over, which, comes, of course, with the request by the elders with Pontius Pilate to guard it. But so let's look at the differences here. All right. And I'll remind you that, well, I'll talk about the garden tomb in a little bit. In the Greek, it says that they had to stoop down. All right. So they're telling you that they're entering into a sepulcher, literally. Now, if you've ever been to the garden tomb in the state of Israel, it is right under what's called what they claim to be Golgotha. It has a skull on it, and I could talk about why I disagree with that completely, and I'm very skeptical about that. But this garden tomb is interesting because it is they claim these quote unquote archaeologists that this tomb was discovered, and that they claim it was built by a rich man, and that it was never completed. What is interesting about the tomb is that when you enter it, if you've ever been there, you have to stoop your head down a little bit, just like they describe in the Greek, and walk in, and you could turn to your right, and you could see one completed bed where the body would have been laid with the shroud and the head napkin or whatever. And there were other beds in there that were never completed. And what the narrative is, what they're saying is that they buried someone in haste in this sepulcher, and they never completed it, which is kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. And it's also in a like a garden where there was a wine press, which is also kind of cool too. But then we see here, it doesn't say that they stooped down. It says they, in the Hebrew, they bowed their face. It's almost like they're looking down. And there was another hint in here. Oh man, I'm trying to find out where it is. But anyways, I'm trying to figure out, because it seems to be bigger than an actual grave that you would bury someone 6 feet under. Like, this appears to be almost like a ditch, if they're actually. But then when we see the two angels, and I'm thinking, I can always envision the two angels sitting in the garden tomb. I can envision that. Like, I could see them physically sitting down on each side of where the shroud would be laid. But here it's like they look down and they saw two angels hanging around in a ditch. I'm kind of having a hard time envisioning that. And one other observation here that I actually really like, that is, I think, a huge improvement, is that in the Greek, it says that when Yochanan, or the other disciple, which came first to the sepulcher, again, which is John, and he saw, it says he saw and he believed. Well, it doesn't say in the Hebrew that he believed. It said he ran away. And I think Rob made an emphasis on that when he ran away. And to me, that makes total sense. Like, think about this scenario. You're going to his grave, and you arrive there, and you look down. Let's just say you're looking down into a ditch. The stone is rolled away, and you're like, his body's not down there. And then you look around, and there's no Roman soldiers, or they're incapacitated. I think they're gone by this point. And you're like, this is a crime scene, and I don't want to be found here. Like, I don't want anyone to say, I saw John hanging out in the very place where his body was stolen. And he's like, yoink, and he's out of there. He's like, I'm running, because I don't want to be accused of anything, of any crimes, right? So when I read that, I just see that as a real human moment. I mean, it makes total sense to me. And with that, I have a few more observations, but I'm going to hand it back to Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you were sharing there. And I just dropped an image into the room here of a grave. And this is kind of what I was somewhat envisioning, them bowing their head down, their face down, looking into the grave. And we see that mentioned in verse 6 and verse 12, that they bowed down and looked into it. And we're going to read further on it too here. But we also notice that there is linen clothes and linen sheets that are laid out neatly down there. So what I also want to talk about, as Michael did, is the angels. And there was two angels and Yeshua standing there. And a couple things to point out is, obviously, they're wearing white, one at the head, one they're sitting at, so if you look at that grave I dropped in there, and just imagine them sitting at each end of the head and the foot, these two angels, and then the third, which is Yeshua, talking with her, and her not recognizing him. And I'm going to talk about that in the second part, my thoughts on that. And here we see another example where Michael gave two examples of where, two angels are being seen. I pulled in where there's three, in reference to the resemblance of men that meet Abraham, in Genesis 18. There Abraham is told, "For I have known him," talking about him, "so that he commands his children and his household after him to guard the ways of Yahuwah, to do righteousness and right ruling, so that Yahuwah brings to Abraham what he has spoken to him." And he's also told about the judgment of Sodom is to come upon inspection. So when you're reading this chapter in the Targum, the Aramaic Targum, it specifically says that each angel is given a specific task to complete and no more. So we see that when the three are there, once Sarai is told about having a child, his task was done, so he left, and that's where we see the other two that are going to Sodom. One to bring the judgment upon Sodom, and the other to help escape Lot and his family. But in this scenario here, we aren't told what the two angels' tasks are beside, working beside Yeshua here. So it just makes me wonder what more were they doing, or was their task to be guarding this gravesite and then appearing once the Talmudim or Mary Magdalene showed up. So, but that's what I wanted to share on the regarding the 2 or 3 that were there, and then I will pass it around over to Michael for anything further, and I'm done for this section here. Michael.
All right, I only have 2 left, so we'll give it off to Noel pretty quickly here. Number 15, I'm going to read both. I just can't make sense of this. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him. In the Hebrew. But she said in herself that he was the thief. So she said to him, I know, if you took him away, tell me where you have placed him, that I may carry him away unto me. How do you get gardener and thief? Like, this is a total opposite. Like, I don't get it. I did a Greek word study on that, and this is the only time gardener is used in the New Testament, so you couldn't even compare it to anything else. I just don't get it. If it's from the original, I don't get how you can be that blatant on that. Maybe someone else can answer that. And then finally, number 17, I'm going to read the Hebrew. Then Yeshua said to her, Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my Talmudim, and say to them that I will ascend unto my Father, and unto your Father, my Eloha and your Eloha. So I want to do a quick little study here. So Yeshua said to Mary, do not touch me. But we'll read in a little bit, 8 days later, Yeshua unexpectedly appeared again to the gathered disciples and challenged Thomas to touch him by placing his hands into the holes that remain in his body. So I was reading up on this, and it has something to do with his priesthood. So in order to understand Yeshua, very different instructions to Mary and Thomas, we need to understand the purity requirements for the high priest on the Day of Atonement. So the high priest was forbidden to come in contact with anything that was ceremonial unclean in order to avoid being disqualified to enter God's presence. So much depended on this ritual purity. So after his resurrection, Yeshua obviously will be our high priest and would shortly be ministering in the heavenly tabernacle, Hebrews 9:11. So, but it is significant that Yeshua appeared to his disciples and told Thomas to touch him after 8 days. Of course, 8 days is significant because it takes 7 days to ordain a priest. So Exodus 29:35, do for Aaron and his sons everything I have commanded you, taking 7 days to ordain them. So that's what I believe after I've studied this, that's the reason why Mary couldn't touch him, but then Thomas could. It was the 8th day, because that's how long it takes to ordain a priest. And that's all I got for this part. I can read the rest, but I'll hand it off to Noel for final commentary.
I had the same question about the gardener, and I had to look back in the previous chapter just to check on that. And it did say that he was buried in a garden. And again, I can't justify or explain why the translator change it to Greek to gardener, but still contextually it's still the same. It makes more sense to me in a way that she would expect this guy to be the thief, and but still in the Greek she still thinks this guy took the body away. So she is still in a garden. Now this may be a little bit off topic, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot and looking into since last week. And even if the state of Israel is the correct location, I don't want to just keep just banging that drum. But I do believe that the garden tomb is the wrong location. I believe what they claim to be the Mount of Skull, the place of the skull, is the wrong location. Now, of course, there's 2 locations if you've ever been there. If you go with the Orthodox Catholic Church location, you go to Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I will say that there's one thing that they actually get right about that place and I'll get to in a second. If you go to the Garden Tomb, that's kind of like evangelicals kind of, emotional touchy-feely. You go there and you feel good place. And they make a convincing case from a sepulcher perspective that was the one he was buried in. If you've ever been there, there is what they claim to be the Mount of Skulls. And it's right below a bus terminal of all places. And the place that he would have literally been crucified on is right where the bus terminal is. Like when you're sitting there waiting for your bus, and I've actually purchased tickets there and rode a bus from that terminal, and it's kind of a weird feeling. Like, was he really crucified on this spot? One of my initial problem with this is if you look at this Mount of Skull, it kind of looks like a skull. But they will even tell you, well, it looked more like a skull at one time, and there's been a lot of erosion. That's the key here you need to focus on, erosion. So just from a official narrative perspective, 2,000 years ago, a lot of erosion has happened to radically transform the landscape all around here, all right? So what my thing is that erosion, well, if it's been eroding, then it may, their whole argument is that, well, it looked more like a skull, but how do you know it looked more like a skull before? That's assumption. It may look like a semi-skull now because of the erosion. 2,000 years ago, it wouldn't have looked like a skull. It would have looked like just a regular hill. And to top that off, then we get into, from where we're sitting in this group, two different resets. We're talking about a mud flood reset and what I would call the Millennial Kingdom reset of fire coming down and radically burning and destroying stuff. So I don't put any faith in this Mount of Skulls. Now, I want to get back to the Church of Holy Sepulchre because they get one idea right. If you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they have what's called the Cave of Treasures, or Adam's Cave. Well, what are they referring to? They're referring to the book of Adam and Eve and Adamic literature. They claim that there was a cave right below where the cross went up, and that's where Adam and Eve lived. Well, that's interesting because I have made the case, according to Adamic literature, that the cave they lived in was the mountain of worship. Well, where was the mountain of worship? It was Mount Zion. All right. Now, this is going to carry us right back to what Ronit was talking about. So hang with me here. I'm going to read from 2nd Adam and Eve. And there's a few passages in this book that talk about this. Is just one of them. They quote from this several times, and also in Adamic literature. I'm not going to read from them all. We're not doing a whole study on this, but this is what it says. Let's see. Okay. Then Noah said unto him, Jared, and Noah is speaking to Jared, who is he of us that shall be left? And Jared answered, thou art he that shall be left, and thou shalt take the body of our father Adam from the cave, this is the Cave of Treasures where he lived on the mountain of worship, and place it with thee in the ark when the flood comes. And thy son Shem, who shall come out of thy loins, he it is who shall lay the body of our father Adam in the middle of the earth, in the place where salvation comes from. I was actually talking to Ronit earlier about this and passing these notes by her. And she's like, every single time it says the middle of the earth, it's talking about Yerushalayim, or specifically Mount Zion. And so if this cave, that salvation is coming from this cave, and it's referring to the redemption, the atonement. That's what it's referring to. It means that the place of skulls is the wrong place. It also means where the Holy Sepulchre put it, it's the wrong place. Because the Temple Mount is not for Antonia, it's literally Mount Zion. And so the place where he was crucified would have been right over there by the temple on Mount Zion, and he would have been buried in a garden right there by Mount Zion. So if you can imagine where the Garden Tomb is, it's by the Damascus Gate, which is on the north side of Jerusalem. And the Church of Holy Sepulchre is over there too. Well, the Temple Mount, or Mount Zion, I shouldn't say the Temple Mount, Mount Zion is on the south side, way on the other south side. That's where the temple would have been. So they're completely directing us to the wrong location on both accounts. And I kind of can't help but think it's all purposeful. but anyways, so that's where the cave would have been. That's where the temple would have been. And it goes in with what Ronita's saying. They took him back to the Sanhedrin after Pilate washed his hands of the whole operation. He was judged there. They carried him out and crucified him. And it appears that he wasn't crucified right in the temple, because he did have to carry his crossbeam. But I don't think he carried it all the way back across the valley, Hadrian Valley, all the way over there. I think he was right there. Anyways, all that to say, I think that's all in my commentary on this. So handing it back to you, Rob, if you have anything else to add.
No, you covered the garden piece I was going to mention, but other than that, great stuff. Michael, over to you.
All right, we'll finish off chapter 20. So I'm going to start on number 19. Then on the first day of the week, when it was evening, and the doors of the house were locked, where the Talmudim were, Yeshua came and said to them, Shalom lakom. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. So when the Talmudim saw Ha-Hadon, they rejoiced. Then he said to them, Shalom imakem. When he had said this, he sighed heavily and said to them, Receive Ruach HaKodesh. And to whomsoever you will let go the iniquities, they will be let go for them. But to whomsoever you will retain the iniquities, they will be retained for them. But Tomah, one of the Talmudim, who was called Mishpak, was not with them when Yeshua came to them. Therefore the other Talmudim said to him, We have seen Ha-Hadon. But Tomah said to them, If I do not see the thrust of the nails in his hands, and I do not put my finger at the place of the nails, and I do not place my hand at his side, I will not believe. After 8 days the Talmudim were in the house again, and Tomah was with them. And Yeshua came while the doors were locked. He came into the midst of his Talmudim, and said to him, Shalom Yeya emakim. Afterwards he said to Tomah, Put your finger here, and look at my hands, and put your hand at my side, and do not be without faith, but be faithful. Tomah answered him and said, My Adon and my Eloah. So Yeshua said to him, Do you believe in me, Tomah, because you saw me? Blessed are those who believe in me. Yeshua Mashiach did many miracles in the sight of his Talmudim, which are not written in this scroll, but these were written in order that you may believe that Yeshua Mashiach is the Son of El, and in order that you may believe them, and you may have life in eternity with Yeshua Mashiach. To Noel for commentary.
You know, I looking back on this now, chapter 20, verse 19 is probably one of those really twisted out of context scripture verses. And I've always been one of those people that, ask questions, and I struggled with the Sabbath question for probably 20 years or 25 years. I mean, probably going all the way back to when I was a preteen. And I remember, I'd pick up the Bible and I start reading it and go, well, I clearly knew what Sabbath was. I knew it was what Saturday, the day before Sunday. And I'm going, why aren't we worshiping on Sabbath? I remember asking that question to pastors and others, and they'll be like, oh, well, it's because, Jesus kept appearing to his disciples on Sunday, and so they just continued the tradition because Jesus wanted it that way. And they would point to this verse right here and say, see, they were worshiping, they were gathering together to worship him. Well, if you actually look at this, it says they were gathered together. In the Greek, it says they were afraid for fear of the Jews. Like they were gathered together, not because they were deciding to swap days of worship or rest on that day. Like they were locking themselves in a room for fear of the Jews. And notice it doesn't say the Romans. They weren't afraid of the Romans. And of course, everyone should see now how much more sense that makes. In the Hebrew, it doesn't say for fear of the Yahudim, but it says, and the doors of the house were locked where the Talmudim were. And so, yeah, it takes away the Yahudim equation, but they were still locking themselves into a room. Like when you go to the synagogue, you don't lock yourself in. The only people that lock themselves in anything are those who are afraid of the shooter on the outside. He's going to come in and open up some rounds on them, right? The other thing I've been looking at here is, again, trying to envision what this looks like when Yahusha appears to them. And everybody knows the verse where, Thomas, doubting Thomas, and he's like, well, look at my thigh and my hands, my wrist, right? And I have to ask myself, like, why why didn't he, if he was whipped, he had a crown of thorns on him? Like, they never talk about those wounds being there. Maybe this has been discussed and settled in some other group that I've never been a part of. I don't know. I'm asking this out of I'm bringing this up out of ignorance. But I always wondered, like, why didn't he have, thrash marks all over his body? I think if you go by the Shrouded Turin, the wounds on there are so bad, you can actually, like, the insides of his body were actually exposed and actually sunburned. And parts of his face was, like, ripped off, I think. And so it appears that the wounds he has are just, specific maybe to the actual sacrifice. I don't know. But we read in the last chapter in 19 how it was describing as cutting off the thighs. And so I still have that question from last week. Was it cutting off the thighs? Was it just sticking a spear in there so that they cut off the support system and they would fall, or like they would break their legs and they didn't break his? But I'm trying to picture now what it would look like if there was a cutting off of the thigh, that he had him go down there and feel it. And maybe I'm reading too much into that. I don't know. I think that's all I have on that. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Rob.
Okay. I want to mention, I'll start with 2 points here. One is verse 22 and 23. 22, we see that when he had said this, he sighed heavily and said to them, receive the Ruach HaKodesh. Where in the Greek, it's talking about he breathed on them, Yeshua breathing the Ruach on them. And here in Hebrew, it's not stating that. I definitely looked at that closer with Ronit. When he had said this, he sighed heavily and said to them, receive the Ruach HaKodesh. I think that's the only verse anywhere that talks about Yeshua breathing the Ruach, because I've used that before. So here it's more or less, it's not stating that, it's him sending the Ruach HaKodesh. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I do have something to drop on that to share. Give me a second to pull it. Okay, I see what it did. All right, I named this file wrong, but I'm going to drop this. This is what I'm talking about. Okay, so I just wanted to add this for people to glance, but it's talking about him sighing and talking about where Yeshua says, receive the Ruach HaKodesh. And then in John chapter 15 that we read, Yeshua is saying, when the Ruach HaKodesh will come, whom I will send among you from the Father, the Ruach of truth. So we see him here once again supporting that he's going to be sending the Ruach for them to receive. And then I just put in here some other points of breathing when the Ruach is referenced with breath. In the Jerusalem Targum, it talks about the spirit of mercies from before Yahuwah breathed upon the face of the waters. Well, that we know that word breathe is also translated as moved, fluttered, vibrated on the face of the waters. We've talked about that one before. But it's interesting that it says Yahuwah breathed, because I could see that as a possible translation, because if it has to do with fluttering, vibrating, moving, we all know about sound waves and so forth. So breathing could be definitely a translation of that. And then also in the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 7, we see that wisdom, she is a breath of the power of Yah. So when thinking about the breath, she is the breath and of the power of Yah, and everything comes from the breath of Yah. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not saying that Yeshua breathed out the Ruach, only the Father does. So I think that's a good point to distinguish that the Father can do that, not necessarily Yeshua, if the Hebrew is correct and the Greek is incorrect in that sense. And then further in Wisdom of Solomon 15, because he failed to know the one who formed him, talking about the Father who formed him, and who breathed into him an active soul and blew into him a living spirit. So once again, it's supporting that only the Father breathes a spirit and a soul into man. So for human made them idols, and they were fashioned by one whose own spirit has been borrowed. Okay, I dropped in verse 16 there just as a reminder that the spirit is borrowed. So our spirit that is in us is borrowed from the Father. He breathes it into us, and when we die, he pulls it back. And while we're living with our soul and his spirit, our life is to come to the knowledge of Yeshua, of salvation, of Yahuwah, and have faith, believe, repent, and have faith. And that's when we receive the Ruach HaKodesh, which gives us that spiritual birth into the next realm. So second part I'll cover here, and I got more, but I'm going to do the second one, is verse 23. Whomever you will leave with their iniquities, they will be left with their iniquities. Or, hold on one second, my screen is not there. Or stop their iniquities, they will be stopped for them. So in translating this is what I got out of looking at that closely. It says, you will let go the iniquities, they will let go for them. And what that's saying here is that you will leave with their iniquities, they will be left with their iniquities. So it's saying it in a different way, but it's essentially the same thing, more or less forgiving others, and not just leaving them or ignoring them or letting it stay as is. So it's just another way of warning people to forgive others, and so that the iniquities can be let go. And I'll pass it on. I got more, but I got some good stuff coming up afterwards, but I want to hold off into that until the next round. Michael, over to you.
All right. I just want to thank Noel and Rob for picking up the slack on the second part, because I only have two quick things. So Noel, get ready. And Rob kind of just hit on it. So number 23 on chapter 20. Let's read that. So I'm going to read both. Whomsoever sins ye remit, they are remitted unto them. And whosoever sins ye retain, they are retained. And then in the Hebrew, and to whomsoever you will let go the iniquities, they will be let go for them. But to whomsoever you will retain the iniquities, they will be retained for them. All I want to say is the difference between let go the iniquities and they will be let go. This is repentance. This is letting go of the sin. That's how. And the Hebrew does a better job. So we're going to do a recap tonight after the next chapter. And overall, the Hebrew does a better job, in my opinion, on explaining obedience, more so than the Greek. And then finally, number 29. Let's read the Hebrew. So Yeshua said unto them, do you believe in me, Tomah, because you saw me? Blessed are those who believe in me. And 1 Peter 1:8, and though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but believe in him, you greatly rejoice with inexpressible and full glory. So it's just an extra blessing to believe and not be able to see. That's faith right there. I do not have anything else. I don't know why I couldn't come up with much, but Noel, pass it over to you.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 21 then. And it's exciting because I get to read this whole chapter, and we're finishing it with this. This is it. So when Michael had said earlier tonight that we are finished with John, I was like checking the weather outside and making sure we're going to make it through the night. Nothing's going to happen. Checking the news, make sure Russia's not coming in. I think we're going to make it through this. So here we go. John chapter 21. That was a little comic relief, people. But
wait, no. Okay, are you seriously reading chapter 21?
Of John.
Oh, I still got more on 20.
Oh, okay.
I thought that was commentary. Sorry.
It's all part of the show, everyone. It's all part of the show. Rob, go ahead.
Okay. All right. I'm going to share some slides, but before I do that, I wanted to point out real quick on verse 29. We see here in the Greek, we got Jesus said to him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen me. And in the Hebrew it says, so Yeshua said unto him, do you believe in me, Toma? Because you saw me? Blessed are those who believe in me. So I think it's a good difference where he's like asking him if he does. So I think that's an important piece to think about with what he's saying there. I want to point out something that could be very interesting, and I'm going to start with this timeline that we're reading in this chapter, and I labeled this as the resurrection timeline. And I didn't take any of the other gospels, as Noel was saying. You know, I all I did was take what John is saying here. And so in this one here, all we're given is that Sunday morning before dawn, Miriam sees the gravestone overturned and tells Kepha and Yochanan, who run to confirm, and they do, and then they return back to where they were. Then we see Miriam, who stayed, and where the other Talmudim left, and she sees two angels and Yeshua. So Yeshua tells her not to touch him, for he has not ascended to the Father yet. And I know Michael talked on that about the priest. I'm going to go a little bit further on that too. And then Sunday night, so that same night, so this was morning when the body was discovered missing. And then that same night, Yeshua visits the Talmudim, and we find that Thomas was not present at that visit. Then the next part that's mentioned on the timeline is 8 days later, which would be that following Monday. Yeshua visits the Talmudim again. Thomas is there, and that's when Thomas touches him. So now, if he touches him 8 days later, that tells us that he did ascend to the Father either that same day or sometime in that timeline. And I think it was probably that same day, and he was coming to the Talmudim on that 8th day, because the 8th day is an important day. So next I want to share, I'm going to talk about the 8th day some more, and dropping that. Okay, so the 8th day, some things about the 8th day. I would say probably all of us here know this type of stuff here, but I'll quickly go over it. We know that the first fruits, the firstborn, belongs to Yah, mentioned in Exodus and Numbers. The firstborn on the 8th day is dedicated to Yah in Exodus, and I got the scriptures there. The altar was dedicated on the 8th day. We see that in 2nd Chronicles, and actually there's many other places that talk about that too, but that's the only one I put in there. And then I'll read a couple of verses that give you an idea about this 8th day with the altar. When a bull or sheep or goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother. And from the 8th day shall be 7 days with its mother. Then the 8th day thereafter, it is acceptable as an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. That's the sacrifice of thanksgiving mentioned on that process. Then in further in another spot in Leviticus, we see on the 7th day, this one's talking about the discharges that are in the skin. So if someone has a discharge in the skin, some kind of pus or whatever is labeled under, that would fall underneath that. The 7th day was washing and bathing those who have discharges from the flesh. And on the 8th day, so they wash and bathe themselves on the 7th day, but on that 8th day, he takes for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and shall come before Yahweh to the door of the tent of appointment. All these things are key. And shall give them to the priest. And the priest shall prepare them, the one as a sin offering, and the other as an ascending offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him before Yahweh because of his discharge. So we see this process of purification. I mean, just overall, generally, it's a purification process. And then we read also that on the 8th day, the priest will make a sinning offering, peace offering on the slaughter place, and I shall accept you, declares Master Yahweh. Then we also read in Ezekiel 43, 7 days they must purify the altar. So this is another process they're talking about. Purify the altar, and they must cleanse it, so they will consecrate it, and they will finish the days. And then on the 8th day and beyond, that the priest will offer on the altar your burnt offerings and your fellowship offerings, and that I will be pleased with you, declares the Lord Yahweh. So we read this, and as Michael mentioned, the purification process of priests is 7 days, and on 8th day they're purified. Here, same with the altar, 7 days, and on 8th day they're purified. We also know that circumcision, we saw that in the chat, and also the redemption of the son. Now, when we're talking about the firstborn is dedicated, there's also the piece that goes along with that is the redemption of that son is to pay 5 shekels of silver, because we all know that process of the dedication to the priesthood, that if the only way to more or less not have your son be dedicated into the priesthood, you would have to more or less pay for that. So that, and then I want to next move on to further on this, and that is, I want to make sure I do it in the right order, guys. The cleansing. Okay, so let's talk about the 8th day and cleansing of the unclean. And I touched on this with the sores. Now I'm going to talk about the leper. So in Leviticus 14, this shall be the Torah of the leper for the day of his cleansing. And we read all of this here. I don't need to read every bit of it here, but the same thing is another process. And it's interesting that some of these processes, you'll see some similarities. You know, the 2 live clean birds, the cedar wood, the scarlet, the hyssop, you know, all these things that are playing in with these offerings that we see in Yeshua's story here. So I want to point out that, and he who is to be cleansed shall wash his garments, shall shave off all his hair, and wash himself in water, and shall be clean. Then after that he comes into the camp, but shall stay outside his tent 7 days. And on the 7th day it shall be that he shaves all his hair off his head, and his beard and his eyebrows and all his hair, and he shaves off. And so we see that he's doing this process, and then on the 8th day he takes the 2 male lambs, perfect ones, and offers. There's a grain offering, etc., to be cleansed. And once again, it's done before Yahweh at the door of the tent of appointment. So lastly, what I want to point out is one more piece on the 8th day is the Nazarite vow also speaks of this 8th day, the Vow the Nazarite. So in this, we see that, I'm just going to read the bottom part. I think most of us are familiar with this, is that, and when anyone dies besides him instantly, so when he's defiled, when the Nazarite is defiled, or something happens to where he's not following the order of the Nazarite, it says, then he shaves his head on that day of his cleansing. On the 7th day, he shaves it. So what I wanted to point out here is not to tie in Yeshua with he was defiled as a Nazarite, or that he was unclean as a leper, or had unclean sores or anything like that. But we do know that he took upon him the sins of the world. And we read that that's when the Father had, turned his face on Yeshua because of the sins upon him. And there had to be a cleansing process. Now, we aren't privy to what that process exactly looks like, but when we look at all of the cleansing processes that are in play, whether it's the priest, whether it's the altar, the Nazarite, the leper, all of these processes to cleanse, to make holy, there had to have been some kind of process that I feel that, in my opinion, that was done because the sins of the world was put upon the Savior. So and unjustly. So him bearing that, there was a process. And my contention or my thought, and I want to propose, and it's just an opinion, a possibility, is that what if Yeshua had shaved his head, shaved his beard, and was going through that process and appeared to them, and that's why they didn't recognize him? Just a thought. So when looking at all of this, I know I didn't tie it in greatly, but I gave you some things to think about as a possibility as to one reason why they may not have recognized him when they did see him, because he did not. I mean, if you took any guy with a beard and long hair and then cut it all off, believe me, they look different. I know I do. So that I wanted to share and have people think about that. And I am done with chapter 20. Nope.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob. That was excellent. Really great research, and I appreciate it. So, this is something that, going through this, I think you had said earlier in the study, Rob, that when we started this, like the first or second week, I'd have to refer back that it felt good to get back into the Gospels again, or the New Testament, because, when we come over to Torah, and a lot of us in this room have been in it for like 3 or 4 years now, maybe some less, but, you get so fascinated, you realize that Scripture itself is everything that you have been studying in Scripture is like the tip of the iceberg, and that Torah itself and the prophets, specifically Torah, is like the whole, huge section that you can't see underwater. And then we get so captivated studying that we, we kind of lose track of reading the Gospels and that kind of stuff again. So it's been quite a long time since I've gone through these, and I appreciate all these different views because, sometimes when you're so separated from it for a time, you still kind of carry some of your churchianity views over. Yeah. And so you guys are seeing me going through this, hopefully kind of breaking down some things and realizing, oh man, I was wrong about that and this and that. Yeah. And so that was all really great. I really appreciate that. And I'd never thought about that before. And I'm seeing this in whole new lights now where I'm like, yeah, I think Yahushua showed up and he was like shaved head and beard. And he's never pictured coming into the room like that. But I'm like, that's a pretty legitimate, I think, thought. So with that, I'm going to start, unless if Michael, you have anything else you want to throw in, I'm going to start reading from chapter 21.
No, sir. I'm ready to go.
All right. Afterwards, Yeshua revealed himself to the people of Tiberias, and thus he revealed himself to Shimon Kepha and Tom called Mispach, and to Nathanael, who was from Galilee, and to the sons of Zabdi, and to 2 other Talmudim who were together. Now Shimon Kepha said unto them, I am going to hunt fish. Then they said to him, As for us, we will go with you. So they departed from there and went up into the boat. But in that night they did not get anything. Then in the morning Yeshua stood on the shore of the sea. However, the Talmudim did not recognize him. Then Yeshua said to them, Children, do you have something to eat? So they answered, No. Then he said to them, Cast the nets further on, and you will find. When they cast the nets in the water, a great multitude of fish entered into them, so they were not able to pull them out. Then that Talmud, who was loved by Yeshua, said to Kepha, It is Ha-Adon. Then Shimon Kepha, when he heard that it was Ha-Adon, clothed himself with his clothes, for he was unclothed, and went into the sea. I'm sure Peter just loved these little details that that John would write about him. But the remainder of the Talmudim came with boats, for they were not far from the land, only about 200 cubits. So when they went down to the land, they saw a prepared fire, with burning coals ready, and fish set upon it, and bread. Then Yeshua said to them, Bring some of the fish which you caught just now. So Shimon Kepha went up into the boat, and brought the nets to the land, filled with an abundance of fish, 153 by number. And with all this, that the fish were so many, the net did not break. Then Yeshua said to them, Come and eat. Now none of them wanted to ask who he was, for they knew that he was their Adon. So Yeshua came and took the bread and the fish and gave to them. And by then it was 3 times that Yeshua had revealed himself to his Talmudim after he returned to life. Then as he ate, Yeshua said to Shimon Kepha, "Shimon of Yonah, do you love me more than these?" Then he answered, "Adon, yes, you know that I love you." So Yeshua said to them, "Keep my lambs." Then Yeshua asked him again, "Shimon Kepha, son of Yonah, do you love me?" So Shimon said, "Yes, Adon, you know that I love you." Then Yeshua said unto him, "Shepherd and feed my lambs." He asked him a 3rd time, "Shimon of Yonah, do you love me?" Now Kepha was anxious because he had asked him 3 times if he loved him. He said to him, "Adon, knowing all things, you know that I love you." So Yeshua said to him, "Feed my flock. Truth I say to you, when I was a young man, you were staying and going to the place of your pleasure. But when you become an elder, you will stretch out your hand, and another will go after you and drive you into a place that you do not find pleasure in." And Yeshua said this, alluding with what death he would glorify El. And when he had said this, he said to Kepha, "Come after me." Then Kepha turned himself back and saw that and saw that Talmud whom Yeshua loved exceedingly, going after him, he who reclined on his chest at the meal. So when Kepha saw this, he asked Yeshua, "What will become of this man?" So Yeshua said unto him, "I want that he abides here until I will come. What is it to you? You come after me." Therefore this word went out among his brothers that this Talmud would not die, but he only said, "I want that he abides here until I will come. What is it to you?" This is the Talmud who does witness to these things and wrote these things, and you know that his witness is true. And many more things Yeshua did, that if all of them should be written, I think all the world would not be able to contain the scrolls which would be needed in their writing. Thus concludes our reading from the Hebrew Gospel of Yochanan. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hit on a few things here. I want to start with verse 2. He reveals himself, and once again, they do not recognize him, and there's noted 7 Talmudim there. So the number 7 up when he appears to them, and then on verse 7, the 200 cubits away. I didn't know if Michael found anything on that, but I'm sure he's got some stuff on the 153 fish, and I wanted to share one thing. I don't want to take away too much of his thunder. I hope he's got stuff on that one, because I know we've talked about the 153 number in the past and dug into it. What I'm going to share here is just simply on represented this 153 that they specifically named it, or not named it, but counted, mentioned the number of the fish. And we see that this could also represent the 48 miracles that is mentioned Yeshua did. There was 153 people that were healed. So I dropped in there the scripture, all the scripture references to each and every one of these for 153 people that were healed by Yeshua that's mentioned in the gospel. So, and we talk about catching 153 fish, and we see that Yeshua heals 153 people written in the gospels. So I just think that's a pretty interesting coincidence, if you believe in that, but regarding fish and pulling them in, and we are to be fishers of men. So that was all I wanted to touch on the fish. I'll let Michael and Noel talk more, and then I want to talk about the lambs. So we see here in verses 14, 15, and 16, the first mention is keep my lambs, and that word keep my lambs is safeguard my lambs. And then the second time when he's talking to Kepha, he says, do you love me? And obviously Kepha says yes. He says, then shepherd and feed my lambs. So keep and safeguard my lambs, or safeguard my lambs, then shepherd and feed them. So we see that safeguard is to protect. Shepherd and feed is to guide and feed them. And then lastly, he talks about feed my flock. So the first two times he talks about lambs, and then the last time it's flock, so perhaps on a larger sense. And I know we talked in the past about the lamb folds. I can't remember which one that was in John that we were talking about, the lamb folds, that Yeshua came for the house of Israel, for the lost sheep, and then he mentions that there will be other lamb folds that will come to him from out the world. And this is talking about the those who are grafted in. So I find it very interesting the process that he has given to Kepha to do this safeguarding, guiding, feeding, and then obviously feeding all of the flock. So that's what I wanted to cover for this round, and I'll pass it over to Michael.
All right, thank you. Shabbat shalom again. That was awesome on the 153 fish. You did not steal my thunder, but I'm gonna have to look at those verses because that's pretty remarkable. And then Noel definitely wins. That's the best stealing my thunder meme I've seen. So we're gonna use that one every time now. And so I have two things, and obviously the 153 is my longest one. So I'm gonna start with number 3. Read the Hebrew. Now Shimon Kepha said unto them, I'm going to hunt fish. Then they said to him, As for us, we will go with you. So they departed from there and went up into the boat. But in that night they did not get anything. So just something real quick. I was doing some studies on Galilean fishing. And so the fishing boat they used was probably around 15 feet long. And they would pretty much always, and I guess it would make sense with some of the parables Yeshua had, they would always fish at night. That was the preferred time for fishing. And this schedule allowed fish to be caught at night and to be sold fresh in the morning market. So you think about some of the parables at night and the big storms coming. I mean, maybe that links to it. Okay, so now the 153. I'm going to read both. That would be number 11. So Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, and 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. In the Hebrew. So Shimon Kepha went up into the boat and brought the nets to the land, filled with an abundance of fish, 153 by number. And with all this, that fish were so many that the net did not break. So where do I begin? So 153, numbers is my thing. 153 is the sum of the first 17 integers. So what does that mean? So if you just count 1 through 17, so 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. So what is that? That's 9. If you continue that, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 17, you get 153. 17 is pretty big in the Bible. So in the Bible, the number 17 symbolizes overcoming the enemy and complete victory. So God overcame the sins of rebellious humans when he began to flood the earth through rain on the 17th day of the second Hebrew month. Noah's Ark and his 8 passengers rested on the mountains of Ararat on the 17th day of the 7th month. Yeshua gained complete victory over death and grave when God resurrected him near sunset on Nisan 17. At least that's what this says. And, okay, so I thought someone was messaging me. All right, the cross-reference that everyone goes to is 2 Chronicles 2, 1 through 2. So now Solomon decided to build a house for the name of the Lord and a royal palace for himself. So Solomon assigned 70,000 men to carry loads and 80,000 men to quarry stone in the mountain and 3,600 to supervise them. So that kind of equals 153,000 to build a house. Another cool stat, I saw someone say Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, I haven't checked this, is used 153 times in the book of Genesis. That's pretty remarkable if that's true. But, okay, so from my opinion on the 153. So I'm going to go back to verse 6. Then he said to them, Cast the nets further on, and you will find. When they cast the nets in the water, a great multitude of fish entered into them, so they were not able to pull them out. I want to highlight a great multitude of fish. And who's casting the net? It's the disciples. I'm seeing it every study. There's always a difference between the set apart and the multitude. The multitude is the fish. The disciples are the one casting nets, fishers of men. So this is just another example of that. So let me try to think of some other examples. So you've heard my theories on Luke. You heard my theories on Philadelphia. In Luke, it says Yeshua sent out the 70 to the lost sheep. 70 was the amount of Joseph's family as they left Egypt. It's Luke and the 70 trying to find the lost sheep to bring them in. There's 144,000 in the multitude, Philadelphia and the rest of the churches. There's patterns in the Bible of the set apart and then the multitude. We talked about that Jasher passage a few weeks ago about the Levites did not pay attention in Babylon and the rest of Israel were slaves. They're all throughout the Bible, guys. Just be obedient. There's set apart and then there's multitude. In my opinion, the 153 fish are talking about the multitude. We are supposed to be fishers of men, those who know his law is eternal. Right now, we got to go out there and grab that multitude, grab that fish. I have a few more at the end, but I'll give it off to Noel now.
All right, so I only have a few observations that I want to talk about here. And I was passing this by Ronit again today because I had a lot of questions about the Hebrew. And in the Greek, this is a popular chapter because when, I'll just say, when Jesus, or Jesus in the Greek, is asking Peter if he loves him, he asks him, we all know he asks him 3 times. And as he continues to ask Peter or Kepha, he gets more and more offended, or not offended at Yeshua so much as that he's getting anxious in a way because, why does he keep asking me this question? Well, in the Greek, Yahusha asked him keep in mind there's 5 different types of love in the Greek. And Yeshua asked, do you agape me? Which is like the ultimate form of love. And Kepha responds that I philo you. He doesn't say I agape you. And these are some of the things we lose in the English translation. So he doesn't, keep in mind, this is the Greek. So Kepha doesn't respond back that he's like almost disagreeing with him in a way. He's like, no, I don't really agape love you. I philo love you. And Yahusha asks again, do you agape love me? And he says, well, I philo love you. And then finally, the 3rd time, Yahusha doesn't ask if he agape loves him. He just, do you philias? Do you philo love me? Like, okay, fine, you don't agape love me. Do you love me as a brother? And he says, yeah, I love you as a brother. And so I had to pass this by Ronit. And what does the Hebrews say? And she says that there's only one word for love. And so I just kind of wanted to clarify that because I've always found this passage to be very profound, studying it in the Greek. And now it doesn't seem to have that context. And I don't know if the person who was translating, obviously they're taking liberties because the person who is writing this into the Greek is saying, well, we have 5 different forms of love. And so I'm going to say that Kepha just said philo, right? Like, I don't know how they figured that out. But I wanted to point that out, that in the Hebrew, it's just, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Do you love me? Of course I love you. But do you love me? Yes, I love you, right? It's just love. There's just one word for it that accounts for everything. The next is kind of just, this isn't like an in-depth scriptural thing, but I have to say that I actually kind of identify where Kepha is at in his life here. And Yahusha tells him, he says, truth I say to you, this is after the love section. Truth I say to you, when I was a young man, you were staying and going to the place of your pleasure, which is interesting here that in the Greek, he says that when you were a young man, but now it seems like Yahushua was saying, when I was a young man, if I'm reading that right, it seems to be that's how they translated this. So Yahushua is like, when I was a young man, you were going wherever you wanted. But when you become an elder, you will stretch out your hand and another will go after you. Now, it seems to be like tradition gets this right, that they always pictured that Peter or Kepha was the oldest or an elder of the group. And it seems to be here that he's older than Yahushua. It says so right here. But I kind of always identify that because I look back at my own life and I was like, because I've really been thinking about that, like through, COVID and everything, like, man, I used to just go wherever I wanted, just any day, just, hey, let's go to, let's go to Paris, Paris, let's go to Africa. Let's just, wherever we want, let's go have a vacation in Hawaii. And I feel like, like I haven't reached that place yet. Like I'm not there yet where, that transition where he says, like, Noel, you're going to go where I tell you to go. And you're going to go to places that are very uncomfortable that you don't want to go. And, anyways, I kind of feel like I'm in that transition right there. The next thing that's kind of interesting is that, and I want to point this out on the timeline, is that Yochanan seems to be speaking of confidence of Kepha's death. I get the feeling that when this was written, that Kepha has already died. And I've pointed out before that Yochanan is he's not even confident of what Yahushua said about him. He says here, he says, therefore this word went out among his brothers that this Talmud he would not die. But he only said, I want that he abides here until I will come. What is it to you? So even Yochanan is not confident that he will be around for Yahushua to come and snatch him. But it seems like Peter is dead here. Now there's a point to this. According to the timeline I'm looking at, that we really don't know when Kepha died, but they say it was like 64 AD or around 62 to 64. Well, if what happened in 66 AD is legit, which I think it is, what I have said it is, it means that John would have only written this book within a couple years, towards the last couple years of his life. Now, that goes with the official narrative, too, in the sense that they say this was written in the 90s, which I find ridiculous. I even just looked it up before this, and they say that the Gospel of John was written in like 90 AD. I find that to be ridiculous. But they're at least admitting that it was at the end of his life. And my ultimate point here is that he knew, like John knew, that like he was in that generation. That generation was coming to a close. He knew something was going to happen. Kepha has already died. Probably some of the other Talmudim have died. There's not many of them left. They're being persecuted. Jerusalem's about to fall. And yet he still sits down to write what I consider to be a masterpiece. I think the Gospel of John is a masterpiece within Scripture. It is one of the finest books written, just gripping story. And that should be an encouragement to all of us, that whatever times we find ourselves in now, like we still want to produce good product for the kingdom, right? We want to sit down and make some good product that is going to, to be the fishers of men, right? Up until the very end. And of course, Revelation as well. And finally, and this is it, and I'm going to hand it back over. I don't think I've stolen any thunder from Michael Robb. I just wanted to go through my fourth point here is that the last verse in this book is like John, as a writer, he knows how to begin a good story and how to end a good story. It's testified in Revelation and here, like the last, the verse of Revelation, like the first verse of John and the last verse, like they're really good. And this is one of those that excites me more than almost any other passage about Yahusha. I just love this. And it says, and many more things Yeshua did, that if all of them should be written, I think all the world would not be able to contain the scrolls which would be needed in their writing. That just excites me because I'm like, we got 4 gospels in canon. We've got probably several more. And yet that doesn't even begin to account for all the things that he did in that ministry and his life. I find that really exciting. And somebody commented in here, and I'll just throw this out there. Someone commented. He said, "What if the or Lupri Kona said, what if the Gospels were written near the end of the millennial reign?" I mean, that's not my conclusion, but I would be willing to, just throw that, kind of in the back of my head on a pile and say, well, maybe. I mean, that's a possibility, I guess. But it would just be interesting context to this, right? Like he's saying, like all the things that he did, like we will never be able to write them down in books, and that just excites me. So. With that, handing it back to you, Rob.
All right. Just one piece here I wanted to touch on is verses 8 and 9 regarding to Yeshua's barbecue. We see here the Talmudim came with boats, for they were not far from the land, only about 200 cubits. So they went down to the land and saw a prepared fire with burning coals ready, and fish set upon it, and bread. So obviously Yeshua here is pulling out the barbecue, getting things ready, and the burning coals. It's like a beautiful fire and coals that's being mentioned here with fish and bread. So. Well, I'll finish it off here. And then Yeshua says to them, "Bring some of the fish which you caught just now." And so Simon, Shimon Kepha, went to the boat and brought the nets to the land, filled with abundant fish, 153, etc. And then Yeshua says, "Come and eat." So, a couple things that we see here symbolically, you could read into this. The coals, the barbecue, so to speak, with the fish, the bread. I mean, we read in Job chapter 28:5, "As for the earth, out of it shall come forth bread. Underneath it, it was turned as a fire." The fire and coals represent underneath, and Leviticus 6:12-13 mentions it being a continuously burning for offerings. So if you want to tie in the fires beneath, it's continuously burning offerings. The bread is from the earth, Numbers 4:7. It's an eternal, continual bread. So we see these tie-ins of what this barbecue could represent, of the earth being represented here with the bread and fellowship, with the earth with the fires with offerings, and then you got the fish. So regarding the fish that's on here, I would kind of relate that also to the peoples. And when we tie in this, we see that in Ezekiel 29:5, a prophecy against Egypt, we see he's saying that I will abandon you to the wilderness, you and all the fish of your canals. So tying in the fish to the peoples that are being abandoned to the wilderness. And here we see Yeshua doing this fellowship gathering, and all of these pieces just represent something on a larger scale. So much symbology of what Yeshua does. So I just wanted to tie that in. That's kind of what I saw of what this meal and fellowship was kind of representing in the grand scale of things, because I can only imagine Yeshua's doing this on the lowly level with just his Talmudim, but on the higher levels, it means so much more. That was it that I wanted to share with what I had, and I will pass it over to Michael.
Alrighty, I made a big list not a big list of our highlights, but I only have two real quick. Finish this off on chapter 1. I'm going to start with 14.
Oh, Michael, before you go, so we're done with chapter 21 before we do that, right? We're all done?
I have two quick things left of 21.
Oh, on 21. Okay, I thought you were saying chapter 1. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No. And by then it was 3 times that Yeshua had revealed himself to his Talmudim after he returned to life. I guess I should have read the Greek too. So this is the Greek. This is now the 3rd time that Jesus shewed himself to his disciples. After that, he was risen from the dead. The Hebrew does a better job, in my opinion. So it's talking about he was risen from the dead, but in the Hebrew it says he returned to life. amazing is that? Me, I don't know. It has a deeper meaning for me, because this wasn't a Lazarus resurrection. He didn't just return to life and he's got to die again. This is eternal life. So I just thought the Hebrew did a better job than just risen from the dead. 25, just real quick. I'm going to read Hebrew. And many more things Yeshua did, that if all of them should be written, I think all the world would not be able to contain the scrolls which would be needed in their writing. The only thing I have is I thought it was interesting that the Codex Vaticanus and Sinaiticus did not have this verse. So I don't know what that means. Maybe we got to look more into those and why they didn't have it, because this was an awesome verse to end it on John chapter 21. That's all I got for 21. Noel, do you have anything, or should we do the highlights?
Yeah, let's go ahead and just recap our the last so many weeks.
Sure. I mean, if you don't mind, Rob, I can go first. I have a few. I won't do all of them.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, right off the bat, Yeshua wasn't the Word in John 1:1. I mean, that was a mind-blowing thing for me. He was known as the son of Aloha. So for those who missed it, he wasn't the Word. He was the son of Aloha, was with Aloha. He was removed as the Passover lamb. So we thought that was interesting in the first part. As we continue to read, he was definitely the lamb who took away the sins. But there was, in my opinion, there was a consistent pattern of removing him as the Passover lamb. So you guys make that what you will. So I know the Passover lamb didn't take away sins. It was, for the wrath. But Noel and I noticed a bunch of times when they were changing the sexes. So the governor of the feast early on in John was a she, but they put a he in there. And then I remember just recently, like a chapter or two ago, they switched the father-in-law to the wife of Kepha. So I thought that was interesting. I'll have Noel probably talk about the sons of Anak. That was huge. It was the giants, right? It was literally the sons of the giants. I thought the Hebrew did a better job, not only on obedience, but I would say removing the standard Catholic Trinity doctrine. They did a great job on the differences, where there wasn't as much confusion. Then I got two, and then I'll end it here. So the other one was Hanukkah. Yeshua didn't celebrate the Feast of Dedication in the Hebrew, John. I thought that was huge. And then finally was one that I kind of found, I forgot which chapter, but it said something to the effect of, "Truth I say to you, no man will reach to see the kingdom of heaven, except he be born anew." And I remember I did a word study on that, and that word for reach in Hebrew is meta. And I remember this was right around the time Facebook was coming out with their name change, and it just made us think, like, wow, are they trying to reach into heaven through technology? And the Hebrew said that. The Hebrew said reach, where the Greek didn't. That's what I have. I thought it was awesome, and I thank you guys so much for joining with us.
Yeah, I was trying, while you were talking, I was trying to find a GIF that would express like someone just like crossing things off on a piece of paper, because I'm like literally here like, okay, I had that I was going to highlight, and then I'm just like crossing them off. And the Sons of Anak was an awesome moment, and I just kind of went with it. I'm like, yeah, I think these were the giants, like the literal Sons of Anak. There's weird things in the Bible, and I think that was one of them, and I'm going with it. But there's quite a few things I can still touch on in terms of actual observations. I want to see what Rob has to say first. But what I really wanted to talk about was something a little bit more personal. And so I had to just double check again while Michael was talking. But this is, I believe, our 15th week of meeting in the Diaspora of Yasharel. We started, I believe it was the first week of November. And I can remember where I was when I called... when I talked to Rob and Michael, and then we the three of us had like a phone call about like, should we do this? Like, and we were having the discussion. I remember I was on the beach walking around, and this all happens after the death of Rob Skiba. And there's a lot of different feelings surrounding his death and all that. And I don't need to get into all that, but I definitely felt that when he died, there was a vacuum. Like there was, that's how I described it at the time. Like there was this, we had crossed this mile marker. And again, I don't know what the mile marker was, but we had crossed some sort of signpost, and I felt this vacuum, and I knew things would be different. Because for a lot of us, we came to Torah and flat earth before that or afterwards through the teachings or the research of Rob Skiba, and the fact that he got up there and really he was kind of like an advocate for a lot of us, because we saw him get up there and just get beaten down week after week after week after week. Like people would just come at him, and just watching him on social media, and people would just attack him and attack him and attack him and just turn on him. And he just, he had to keep deflecting that. And so we kind of saw him as that, that model for a lot of us. And so it hit me, it really hit me, and it hit us all in different ways. And I wanted to just start the Sabbath group. And I was so grateful when Rob and Michael, I had started out talking in this group about how I've known Rob and Michael now for about a year. Now, technically, we probably unofficially met at Zen Garcia's conference back in 2020 in Atlanta. But the three of us just really clicked on so many issues, just like on the feminine Ruach HaKodesh, on our love for extra biblical texts, the deep dive into stuff and things that other people won't even look at, even touch, and willing to ask those questions. And so because week by week, I put a lot of research into different stuff. If you guys were there for Thursday night, when I gave my study on the seven firmaments of heaven, it was like a 62-page report, and it took a lot out of me. Like I was just famished after writing that, and I didn't even finish it. If you were there for it, I only got through like halfway through the third level of heaven, what was promised to be the seven firmaments of heaven. And so I get to Sabbath after doing all this research week by week and wondering, how can I get through another week and turn out more papers, more research? How can I push myself? I get to Sabbath, I'm exhausted, and I don't always have the best research in here. I come in here and I'm just happy to read these texts, try to offer whatever I can if I have insights. And it's so awesome to have Rob and Michael here with me, and just to hear their perspectives. I love Rob's very colorful charts. I make fun of him a lot. I put the cats in there, but I love his charts. I think all of you do. And I just enjoy this group, and it's been quite a journey the last 15 weeks. I don't mean to get all sentimental or nostalgic or whatever, but this group has been wonderful. And that's my reflection. I'll give more, but Rob, you go ahead and give your thoughts on this book, and then I'll finish off whatever I don't cross off the list.
Well, yeah, I didn't make a list on the thoughts. I was going to be more discussion on it. I know Michael just covered some of those highlights that were key ones. Obviously, the discussion, one of the biggest ones was the Sanhedrin talk about who truly crucified the Messiah there. And I just thought that was just amazing to really validate that. And it just so clearly makes sense, and why it may not have been translated clearly for reasons. That was the biggest one that I would say would be a big obvious one. And then back to what Noel was mentioning, I know Michael and I were seeking out to do some type of sharing on some platform of however we're looking at starting our own website or doing something to share a lot of the research that he and I have been doing, that we're not seeing many others talking about these topics. And he and I both came into Torah from that conspiracy side of research, and that's what brought us to the Torah and understanding the truth of that, and then being able to sit at the seat of Moshe and learn and relearn what I was taught was an amazing journey. And then being humbled and praying for the wisdom, and then the Father giving us some of these topics to cover. Where I remember Michael and I talking about the Ruach. We're like, if we talk about the subject, we're going to be like, black-eyed by everybody because these topics are somewhat taboo on mainstream, etc. And we're willing to at least discuss them, search them out. I mean, that's how that's what researchers truly do. And so when we had met you, talking about some of the topics you did, obviously we all want to be cautious with what we hunt down, so to speak, and do it with discernment and prayer. And so the opportunity where you talked about us offering this opportunity was just seemed to be the right fit in making that happen. And we do appreciate doing this because it's also forced us to get into more of a pattern of doing this research and bringing these things out that we see. The whole journey on John, going back into the Gospels, we're unveiling a new ways to look at this, because we have an understanding as we dig into it deeper. It validates a lot of it, and then also we are relearning some of these things that we had thought or that we were taught in mainstream teachings. So it's been a great journey, and it's been great to learn these views as we discover them. And I look forward to doing more into Revelation and other books with this. And one of the best things that I do like about this format that we have is that, like you mentioned, none of us talk to each other on what we're studying, what topics. Michael's doing his own research, I'm doing mine, and Noel is doing his, and then we all come together and we speak on these topics, and we'll bring fresh views from what the Spirit is speaking to us. So I enjoy that part, and I hope everyone else that's listening and following along has been a blessing to you, and filling a hole or gap, or at least you're learning something from it. And as everything, whatever you hear that I say, research yourself. Don't believe it. Prayerfully consider it and do your own research. We're all accountable for our own salvation, our own soul, and we must do so in prayer and in love. And that's what I want to follow up on that. I'll pass it over to Michael.
Did you
Yeah,
did you hear that confession? They targeted me, and I've never said this before, but they actually rode up to my house on a couple bicycles like some Mormons, and they knocked on my door.
Yeah.
Just real quick, and then we'll open it up. I just wanted to speak a little bit. For those who don't know, like Rob and I have known each other way longer. We've known each other personally way longer than this, since joining the server. And like he was saying, we've done a lot of great studies and on our own. But I just, I've learned so much just doing this. Taking the time out of my day, each week, and getting into the Word has truly been a blessing for me personally. And I just hope that you guys have gained a lot and grown a lot as well. And it's just awesome. Like, it's one of my favorite nights, to do these things. Like Noel was saying, it's a perfect fit, I think, just the way all three of us and how we've come to this truth, and the humbleness, and we're willing to look at any particular topic and kind of examine it, and it's just a beautiful thing. So thank you guys. Love it. Love you guys. Should we open it up? Maybe?
Well, I still had a few. Yeah, I got all
Sure,
sentimental, but let me go get some of my recaps of John. I was crossing off. I wanted you guys to get yours in first. And so here's a few things that I noticed is that one of the big differences, Michael already talked about the son of Aloha versus the Word, but John chapter 1 also shows us that he wasn't writing it to the Greeks. And we addressed that in chapter 1 where he says you, and he's writing to the Yahudim. And so that's a big difference there in understanding this book when it has constantly be seen as a Greek book, especially with the whole logos theme that is now removed. Another interesting one is the John 17, where I really like the placement of the word ikad or ikad in there. And this takes us back to Deuteronomy 6:4, which says Elohim is one. And in this context, we really see it, explaining away the Trinity again, in my opinion, because it's a problem if he's saying that no, they're going to have their explanations for this, but he's praying that we would be ikad just as he is ikad. Like we're seeing what it is for the Elohim, Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yasharel to be ikad, and I really liked that in John chapter 17. The one thing, though, I really wanted to two things I wanted to touch on. One is that this whole issue that came up with the Ruach HaKodesh as we were reading through this. Now, what I didn't mention is that, and I think Rob alluded to it, is that one of the things that first kind of united the three of us was when Rob and Michael were at my house, the first time I really formally met them, and they were talking about the feminine Ruach HaKodesh, and I made some comment about there, like, hey, I haven't really researched that, but I'm interested, why don't you sell me on it? And they were like, I could see they were like thinking about it. But we actually set up a phone call, and they went through it with me, and I was just blown away. I'm like, this just, I took all the notes, and I went and read all these scripture verses, and well, so I was fully on board with the Ruach. This was months ago before we started this group. Well, this is like almost the first hurdle we've come to when we're reading through this Hebrew text, that it appears that it is possible that the Ruach is masculine in this, and that has brought up some issues that we have talked about. Now, I am still of the opinion that it is undecided for me. I'm not decided that it is masculine, and I've been trying to reach out to different people who read Hebrew and get their opinion on this. But this has brought up an interesting point to me as we go through these studies. How do we pick and choose in our readings in Scripture and decide what we're going to believe based on our preconceived notions? So this is one of the tensions of Scripture, and this is why it is so easy to get into the King James only camp. Say, I'm going to be Textus Receptus all the way, but not only that, I'm not going by any other translation other than what King Jimmy did in, was it 1611 or whatever? That was a supernatural transition of the Holy Spirit, and this is what I'm going with. Because if you go with that, you have something now that is authoritative, that you don't question this, you don't go outside of this box. And when you start reading these other books, you start seeing that not all the verses do line up. Like, I could attack the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus based on the fact that like the NIV and others have missing passages that the King James don't have. Well, we were reading in here that there are passages added in the Textus Receptus and taken away in here that aren't there. And we're like, well, what do you make of that? Right? How we got into the issue. We got into this idea of that all four Hebrew Gospels apparently say the Pharisees killed Yahusha. Well, I could run with that, but then what do I do with the masculine Ruach? You see what I'm saying? And these are all things as we dig into these books, we get this tension, and we have to look at all the facts and say, well, what am I going with here? And I hope that you guys can kind of see that with Michael and Rob and I as we go through this. And, not everything is as smooth as butter of the 1611 King James here. We have to kind of get down in the mud. We got to dig through this stuff. And I believe that's the way Yah intended it. I really do. I've pointed out before about, the books he's removed according to Second Esdras and all these things he's stashed away and they're being revealed. And we see this with Ezra writing the Bible and taking away from the Paleo Hebrew and doing the what like people call it the Babylonian script, and they'll come on and mock me for, oh, you just go by the Babylonian script, and it's like, well, that was all Yah's plan. It really was. And these are all things we have to go through. And I'll give you a quick example. We were in my study on Thursday night where I'm quoting from Second Enoch. I straight out admitted that I think Second Enoch, there are passages in there that were added later. It's not all fluid. And some of it, I hate to use this word Gnostic, because Gnostic is a weaponized word that doesn't mean what most people think it means. But it appears there are some inserted later some Gnostic passages. Now I'm not completely decided on that, and I point out here that when you look at a lot of the church fathers, the post apostolic fathers, whatever, as they're writing things, they're actually misquoting, they're actually misrepresenting the Gnostics. That tells you right there they're weaponizing them. They're actually making claims about them that aren't true. And so I point that out to everyone, like, what did, and there's also a lot of texts that are claimed to be Gnostic that are, they're grouped in there just to weaponize them, right? And so this is what I'm talking about getting our hands dirty and looking at all this stuff, and we're going to probably doing a study next on the Aramaic Targum, and we're going to be looking at that and going, well, how is this different from the Hebrew Masoretic? And so I really enjoy that. I really enjoy trying to figure all this out, all these puzzle pieces. That excites me, and I want everyone to understand, because I read this all the time online. They're like, "Oh, Noel's a great researcher, but take everything he says with a grain of salt." I see that like a common phrase. I see that everywhere, and I'm like, it's like Rob just said. Like, don't take anything I say as the Lord saith. I'm just quoting from these books. You go back, you read them for yourself, and you decide. One other thing that I want to just lay out really quickly, a quick case. I don't want to take all your time tonight. Was I found it interesting that Ronit was very, very nervous about talking about the Pharisees being responsible for killing Yahusha. And a lot of it comes from her background as a Spanish Jew and stuff like that. And she's really nervous about it. And she's told me about that. And, she was like, yeah. And I kind of see why, because I as the last week, I've noticed since I put it out there that a lot of people have been responding to me exactly as they were almost, I feel like, trained to do. And there's a lot of like, Jewish guilt, a lot of, Holocaust guilt. And they're like, oh no, that's not true. No, they're like, nobody killed Yahusha. He laid down his own life. Therefore nobody murdered him. And I'm like, well, okay. Like, I just want to point out here that, like, that is clearly true, that Yahusha laid down his own life. And we see repeatedly in the Gospel of John and these other Gospels where they tried to kill him and they couldn't. You know why? Because it wasn't, he hadn't laid down his life yet. They were not able to kill him unless if, he gave them permission. But I add this. If someone were to come to kill my family and I were to lay down my life for my family and I were to die in their place, I don't think Yah's up in heaven going, well, Noel laid down his life for his family. Therefore, the people who killed him, they didn't really kill him. They didn't really murder him. I'm going to, cross out their murders hard. I'm not going to hold them accountable for that because, that doesn't really count. I just want to separate here that there's a huge difference. And I bring this up because it seems to kind of be bubbling up with a lot of people this week, that they don't want to address this issue, that the Pharisees really did try him and kill him and torture him. There's a reason why there's a clear agenda. I don't know if it's a clear agenda. It's an agenda that the translators are clearly leaving this out. I just kind of want to just, you guys know me. I just like to say it as it is. I don't like to doctor things. I don't like to make things politically correct. If I see it, I like to say it, and I said it. Said my piece. With that, go ahead, Rob and Michael, and then we can open up the floor.
Yeah, I can follow up. Two things I want to follow up on is one is the Ruach, talking about that in here, and we see that on the Ruach, it's talking about we see the Ruach HaKodesh, and then we also see the Ruach of Truth. And I am perfectly fine with changing my thought process if these are separate Ruachs that have different functions, or if it's or if they are one and the same. It's not 100% clear. So I keep that mindset open. And when we discover these things and reading it in the masculine form, Perhaps the Ruach of Truth is a masculine form, and the Ruach Hakodesh is not. I don't know. It's one of those. It's one of those things that you've got to be open-minded with. But ultimately, I think what you are trying to allude to with what you're saying is you're taking all this information in, and we have to make the best judgment on all of the context that we are filtering this through. So if we're reading scriptures that have some type of, if you will, contradiction in different areas of using words, then you have to examine it through the context they're being used. Could this have been misplaced, miswritten, or it has a double meaning? So it expands these possibilities of just thinking it is one way and can only be one way when some of these words are being used. So that's the hard part I see in talking with people. If a lot of people have a certain mindset of this is like the King James only, this is what it is, nothing else. I won't even listen to it. Everything else is wrong, etc. If people have that mindset, it makes it very difficult to look and explore other scriptures, different translations, and even other books out there that have additional details to the scriptures to give it more history. So I'm open to that. And then secondly, one other thing I wanted to mention on here is that Yeshua came for the house of Israel. He came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So people have to understand that he didn't come for the Gentiles. He came for the house of Israel. Now, Gentiles can be grafted in to the house of Israel. But because due to the mainstream teachings out there, they aren't teaching this. And it's very clear. So that was the biggest thing that I just want to end with on my views. So I'll pass it over to Michael for anything final before we open it up.
Just real quick, 2 seconds. As far as the gender of the word, like for me, that's like to me, that's not going to make or break it. Like we don't even use that as one of our highest proofs to prove it's feminine, the gender of the word. So no matter which text says that, for me, that's not a deal breaker at all.
Good point.
But like everybody else said, like it's, please study it out. This is what we've come to, and yeah. So go ahead, Noel.
Well, yeah. So when it comes to stuff like this, it's always difficult having conversations on a large topical issues because obviously I myself cannot be proficient in every single area. So like one thing that I don't have a lot of wisdom on, and I admit it openly all the time, is the calendar. Like I always, tell people like, welcome to Torah, because it's one of those things that people argue about. And I start talking about anything about sunset, sunrise hours, night, darkness, light, Saturday, seventh day, moon, whatever. There's always people, they start throwing in all their, their expert opinions on. And I don't always know what to do with all the information, but this is one of those things that like this, as you said, Rob, the spirit of truth. I find that interesting, and I don't really know what to do with that information. I don't. So what I do is I kind of set it aside, kind of on the shelf, and it's there. Hopefully when something else comes along that kind of, it's almost like an unsolved case, like when something else comes, it kind of jars or unjars my memory. I go, oh, there it is. I remember that. And I pull it back down and it connects, it fits. And then I see a different picture than I thought, or the same one as before. So that's kind of how I try to operate. And that's where I'm at right now. I don't know what to do with it. And I'm okay being in that tension. So.
Yep. Perfect. It's same mindset. Yep.
All right, guys. So let's go ahead and open it up. Thank you all for hanging in there. And thoughts, questions, comments?
Yeah, this has been great. Praise Yah. I had a quick question. Who was the Talmud disciple being referred to in verse 20 in chapter 21? The one who had his head on Yahushua's chest?
John.
Okay, John. And secondly, last week we were reading about the oath that when was we? Was it Thursday? We were reading about the oath that Eve made.
Right.
Where did we read that in? Because I just read it in the Book of Adam.
Yes, there's two books that are very similar to each other. There's the Book of Adam and the Revelation of Moses, and both of them are very similar, but also have some differences.
Thank you.
I had one thing I wanted to mention, just about 3 days and 3 nights, and another question I have for y'all. But the 3 days and 3 nights, I don't know exactly how that all works out. I've played it every which way from Sunday, and I'm still not convinced on any of them. But there was an interesting one I haven't heard many people talk about that I was thinking maybe might have some merit to it, and it was the idea that when the eclipse happened, or when it went dark and they came back light, that dark time was actually counted as a night. So like when he died, that was the day. Then it went dark, that was a night. Then it became light again, another day. Then the sun actually set that day, so that would be another night. So it would, if it was like on a Friday to a Sunday, and you can't fit 3 days and 3 nights in there, the only way you could is if you counted that eclipse as an extra night and day that came in. But that was just a thought I wanted to throw in there. And the question I have for y'all is this particular manuscript we're reading from. I think it's the VAT EBR 100, Vatican something 100. What I looked up about it said it was, and I don't know if this is true, this is just what I was able to find on it, is that it was a 14th to 15th century document translated from the language Catalan into Hebrew, and it was found it was either by a Spanish Jew or it was found in Spain and is in the Vatican Library right now. Do any of you guys have any information on this manuscript as far as when it did came about and whether it was a translation from another language or originally written in Hebrew?
So the research that I have done on this document is I did not see any connection to the Vatican. I could be totally wrong about that. I'm not saying that this is not held in the Vatican right now, but this document was discovered around 1805 or the whereabouts, which is kind of an interesting time period for all of us doing our research. And that's something I actually I'm developing a talk on that one Thursday night, perhaps, where I'm going to go through all these books that were brought to our attention in the 1800s. Well, this book, this document comes from a collection of almost the entire New Testament, which was in Hebrew in India. Comes from a synagogue in India. So this was, according to, again, what I researched on this. And so it seems like you and I came to very different results, and I could be completely wrong. But it was a missionary. I don't recall his name at the moment. He went over to India. He went to a synagogue, and he saw the entire New Testament written there, all 4 Gospels, Revelation, Jude, James, including some of the epistles of Paul. And these books were used by rabbis, Jewish rabbis, to study Christian thinking. And I point out that's actually really interesting, and actually I think lends to the case of these being more authentic, because if they were looking to smear Christianity or Christian thinking or Messiah, they didn't have to make it look attractive. And these texts, from what we were reading, are way more pro-Torah than the Greek. So that's interesting to point out. And the same translators believe that the writings of Paul are not legitimate, that they originate from Greek, but they're making a case that Jude, James, Revelation, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all written in Hebrew. And that's where I've gotten on this. And I think it's interesting that these books, according to this narrative, have been around, sitting in a library. These were sitting in it might have been an Oxford library. They've just been sitting there for like the last 200 years, and nobody has been interested in. No scholars have touched these, and I think I know why now. I think we discovered it. Like somebody made a comment in here, like nobody expected Ronit to to come along. She saw like that was good detective work. I think she solved it. I think they were reading these texts and going, "Nope, can't have that." And I think that they kind of buried them, and they're kind of just coming to light now. And I think for those of us that have been in this study, we're on the cusp of something. I think I think like we kind of stumbled upon something that is very profound. So those are my thoughts.
And my thoughts to follow up is that, yeah, I mean, this could be a translation from another language. It's possible. I only say that because there are some oddities in there that you find that seem to stick out. So I reserve to say that it is possible as far as that goes. So.
Hey, Noel, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great study, brother. Very good, very good. Just wanted to actually expand a little bit on what you mentioned on about the Gnostic texts. I think from how I see, there are two kind of preferences of how Satan lies. So the first would kind of be that he defiles the truth and he makes the truth appear as a lie. And then the other thing is he invents lies and are completely out of the blue, completely fantastical lies, and makes them as truth. So if anything, if Satan knows some things to be as truth, then I know that he will want to defile them. And then we have the other deception, which actually are completely different. It's a different category, which are completely made up lies, and they appear as truth. And I think he's done both of them. Now, when it comes to the first category, which is basically making the truth appearing as a lie, then I wouldn't be surprised if he actually attacked the Gnostic text. And from my understanding, the reason why actually Yeshua spoke with parables is actually to make it easier to people to understand some Gnostic beliefs. And I wouldn't be surprised, and this is a speculation, I'm not going to say for sure that this is actually a truth, but it's a discussion and it's just a speculation from mine. I wouldn't be surprised if the true knowledge which we are supposed to know is the knowledge of the heavens, which actually is the knowledge, that we possibly will be acquiring when we get into heaven, or we actually understand the truth. And that is the same kind of knowledge that we see in many Gnostic texts. Because think of it this way, if Yah sees us as children, or even Yeshua says that feed the lambs, which Mike very well said, the lamb is a young sheep. That means that we are children at the moment, and when you explain something to children, you explain it in a way to actually understand them. But that means that that is not the proper way to explain it to them. It's just a way to actually explain it to people who don't understand, which is what? The young children. So in a sense, in this life, I would assume or presume that we only are supposed to understand the parable side of things. And obviously we have also the Gnostic texts, which they are there if we want to dig deeper, which is fine. But that's the main purpose. And then we have the true knowledge, which we see that actually Jesus taught to his disciples in secret. Why? Because it was only it's possibly concepts that are very difficult to grasp. And by that I mean, because it was in secret, even those knowledges Satan took advantage of, and he kind of defiled them. So that's why, yeah, I totally agree with you that the Gnostic texts, it's a knowledge, And we just have to, when we read the Gnostic text, we just have to act for discernment, I believe, in order not to read a Gnostic text which has been possibly corrupted. And if we read such a text, we need to read it with a very grain of salt, or be very discerned and ask for help from the Ruach to help us make discernments where the truth is in those Gnostic texts and where the lie is. One of the things which I also think has been Satan has pushed forward is the fact of the New Age belief system, like yoga, etc., which could most possibly come from, it has its roots from truth, which actually derive from the heaven knowledge, which Yeshua taught in secret to these disciples. But as we know, Satan would want this kind of knowledge, which is the true knowledge, corrupted and create even a belief system. And in this belief system, which like the New Age, most possibly might have wanted to corrupt it in order for people to completely either embrace that kind of knowledge, or if we are true Torah believers or true Christians will say, oh, no, I don't want to believe in the New Age. And I definitely wouldn't want anyone to go to the New Age. I was there as well, and I detest myself for that. But I just want to say that, that even the knowledge and the Gnostic texts, they have been defiled, and they have been put out of context, and they have made like a new religion. And this is possibly how I see that kind of Satan works.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think one of the key words, as I was trying to listen to you, I feel like one of the key words that can express this is what we call controlled opposition, right? You control the opposition controls the truth in order to distort it and misdirect. And I think your example of the New Age movement is an excellent example. Now, I have never been a part of the New Age movement. I am not telling anyone to go to the New Age movement, nor am I a New Ager. But I have seen some things in the last couple of years as I'm digging more for the truth in Scripture, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I rejected some things just because the New Agers were embracing it, and I saw that as proof that it was wrong. And I'll give a quick example: crystals. I do not pray to crystals. I do not have crystals in my house. I just want everyone to know that, not take that out of context. But I used to think that crystals were satanic. And then I look and I see like the gems that the Levite priests have on their chests. And I'm just like, well, isn't that interesting? Right. And, that I was told that something like that was evil, and yet it's in Torah. Right. So I want to just quickly go back to this idea of hidden knowledge. I'm not on Facebook really anymore. I can imagine all sorts of things are being said about me on there all the time. And I remember it just how exhausting social media was and being on there. And I remember one day I read some comment. He's like, he was actually put this as his Facebook update. He wanted everyone to know his Facebook update was that Noel is a Gnostic, that he has found out that I have hidden knowledge and that I'm not sharing it with everybody. And I was just like, yeah, it's like you found me out. I have hidden knowledge and I'm not sharing it with everybody. And this is just the funny thing about like Gnosticism. Let me give you an example. I've quoted from the Gospel of Bartholomew. And if you look that up, people will say that is a Gnostic text. And you're like, well, why is that? And as soon as people hear that, they're like, oh, I can't read that because it's Gnostic. It's going to lead me astray. And so I started looking, well, why is this a Gnostic text? And one website was saying because Jesus is giving hidden knowledge to his disciples. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Because if we have just defined Jesus giving hidden knowledge to his disciples, you have just claimed that all four Gospels are Gnostic. Because he goes and tells the crowd one thing, and then he explains it secretly to his disciples. That's Gnostic. That's hidden knowledge. And so, again, I'm not telling... I want everyone to be clear. I am not a Gnostic. I am not promoting Gnosticism. But when I look back at history and I see the Roman Catholic Church creating this idea of Gnosticism to tell us to not pursue it at all costs because it will lead to our damnation, I'm thinking, well, that's interesting, because all we ever get is the illusion of choice. And here I see the beast system creating this illusion of choice. And I just think there's something going on there that is not accurate as advertised in the Christian church. And that's all I have to say about that. I cannot speak for all the books. I am not advocating all of them. Everybody needs to search them out for themselves. But I am just very, very skeptical of the entire storyline. And as I said, the word Gnostic is a weaponized term. If I say that, people just shudder and they're like, "Oh, I get this icky feelings about Noel because he's leading me down this path of hidden knowledge and all this kind of stuff." And it's just like, okay, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, I guess. That was sarcasm, everybody.
Yeah. I'll follow up with you on that. Is that if Yeshua, okay. So we can look at Yeshua being Gnostic, because how many times did he say parables to the masses and then go to his Talmudim and have to explain them, sharing hidden knowledge to them? So, depending on how you want to take that, he was doing the same thing.
Well, now that we've opened up that taking the baseball bat to that hornet's nest, does anyone else have anything that they'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention in regards to the Thomas. I'm not really sure that, and we see in the normal kind of narrative, in the KJV narrative and movies, etc., that Thomas actually touched Yeshua's hand. But I just wanted to mention, I don't see in the Hebrew translation that he actually did, because it mentions that he saw Yeshua. But what I think that really happens is, as soon as Yeshua came into the room and Thomas saw him, I think Yeshua can read the heart. So Thomas was actually thinking in his heart, okay, I need to touch his hand. But instead, he just saw him, and Jesus replied on his thoughts. That's my perspective, because I don't see anywhere that saying that Thomas actually touched him. But I think that Jesus spoke straight to his heart. And in his heart, he had the question that, oh, maybe I need to touch his hand. But obviously, he didn't have the chance even to speak these words. Do you know what I mean? This is what I see, at least from the translation. I'm not sure if I'm missing something or anything. What do you think, guys?
Well, Robert, Mike, go ahead, Robert.
He, it says here, afterwards he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands, and put your hand at my side, and do not be without faith, but be faithful." So we have to either think that he did as Yeshua said, or that he didn't need to, whether he was intimidated or what, but he doesn't give a response for or against that statement to support either view. So the assumption would be that he did as Yeshua said, because it doesn't say that he said, "Oh, no, I believe." So I would have to assume that he actually did do that compared to what he's saying, because Thomas answered him and said, "My Adon, my Eloah." So that could have been at the point of him touching and then him realizing and then him saying that, or it could be he didn't touch him and he just declared it. But it's not, it doesn't give an answer either or. So I'd have to support that he was obedient and did as Yeshua said. So,
well, I don't think from how I see it, and I could be wrong, but I feel that Thomas wasn't there in the first appearance of Yeshua, and I think because he already had a predisposition not to believe Yeshua that he was resurrected unless he saw him. And think because he missed the first appearance, which was I think on the first day, and he saw him on the 8th day, and I think his kind of faith was kind of fading away, and he was putting on his mind and to his friends that, oh, once I see him, I will definitely want to charge him. But then when Yeshua appeared, he didn't even go there, because when you see the presence of Yeshua in front of you, shining and everything, you don't go, okay, now I saw you, let me touch your finger. I kind of feel a little bit strange that he would actually go all the way and touch him. I think for a person like Thomas, which especially when you're in the present, sometimes we speak some words behind some people and we say, oh, when I see him, I'm going to do this and that. But when the rubber touches the road, then things are different. You just only need to see him, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. But my point was, it's not clear for either or. It's just we would have to, just like we're speculating on whether he did or did not. I would favor towards that he did, but it could be argued. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Any other thoughts? Any thoughts on Yeshua shaving his head and beard? I was hoping to get some feedback on that one.
My first thought was, if he was all shaven, was that right before they murdered him, or was that a time before he murdered him? Did he have time to grow back his hair and his beard and mustache?
Well, yeah, that's the thought. Is I would presume it was after the resurrection that because all this, if it's according to possible theory, if he had the sins placed upon him at his death, and then resurrected, I would have to think that he's resurrected in a new body, and there's no need to do such a thing. But seeing all the symbolic purposes of the cleansing and sanctifications of the altar, the priests, of uncleanliness, all of these things that have to deal with uncleanness and sin, etc. That maybe there was some type of process that took place that he had to fulfill, and that's why I say it's all speculation. But that's why I bring up all of these points as a possibility to explain why they didn't recognize him. So, and I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to suggest that it's true. I just, I'm more than happy to look at the possibilities to explain some of these matters. And like Noel says, I'll put it on the shelf until I find something else that may support it. And until then, it's just a nice thought.
I think it's quite possibly they weren't expecting him. They, who comes back to life, or is risen from the dead, or returns to life, even though he told them. So it was almost like, oh, you're here. Oh, yes.
It makes you also wonder if the new resurrected body that he came back in or of was looked differently in some manner. Maybe it was perfect in some type of way, whether how we would judge someone's looks that have symmetrical face, and that how they look more handsome because of these features, etc. So perhaps the perfect body is perfectly symmetrical, is perfectly all that stuff. So you get the body 2.0 from what you saw before to this upgrade, so to speak. So that's
that being said, Cannon or John had no problem identifying Yahusha in his glorified burning bronze-like body in heaven, and sure. that had to look very, very, very different from the resurrected body that appeared in John 20 and 21.
Yeah, true.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yes. I keep having issues with my sounder here. I've always had the thought that because he was so, beaten up, and they were ripping his beard from his face, and that maybe his face was disfigured. I do like the implications that you were saying, though, about, the vow, and they would, be clean shaven. Maybe when you die, your hair kind of dies. Maybe it just all fell out. before he, or maybe like you were saying, his transfigured body was now fully clean.
That's a good thought. Good thought that you say there, because I wonder, there's certain things that are talked about when you're doing cleansing yourself, about cutting the hair, shaving, getting it all off. Could it be possible that in a body, the resurrected bodies, that we will be hairless? It's a good thought.
Well, and the other thing I was thinking when Noel was talking about John didn't have any problem recognizing him in the vision. And I think sometimes when we have spiritual visions, you just know who, you've never seen, who that is. You just know who it is, You're like, okay, even though you've never seen Yahusha, when, you have a vision of some sort, at least the people that, do, you just know who it is, kind of idea, spiritually, I guess.
Well, it reminds me of like when somebody shaves their beard and you don't recognize them at first.
Well, yeah, that's why I thought that was really good insight, and especially going hand in hand with the idea of the, the Nazarite vow and, being completely clean. I was just hearkening back to what I used to think of why they didn't maybe readily recognize him about his face being disfigured, because he carries his scars. I mean, if he still has scars in his hands and his arms and his side, and then he still has scars on his face too. Well, they said he was beaten to unrecognizability and shredded to bits. So
that was my whole point. That and again, if everyone's going to feel differently about the shroud, most people seem to feel it's legit. I've said that I've kind of opened up my, opened that up again, and willing to admit that I was wrong. That maybe it is legit. I don't know, but according to the shroud, I mean, you look at the man in there. He was beaten so bad that they say that the person in there, that his insides were showing on the outside. His skin was just ripped open, and it just all kind of showed. It was all like it's just like sunburn. I mean, but so I made that comment that it's like he doesn't talk about the scars on his face. He doesn't talk about the scars on his back. He's like, look at my hands, look at my side. And they're like, oh, but they did look and go, oh yeah, that's your beaten back right there. So I was kind of wondering about that. Why only those two were mentioned or remained, but that could just be, John making that connection, of course, too, with, making a big deal about his side being speared. So I don't know. But now that I think about it, it never says, I don't think in John, that he was nailed to the whoop and the waffle, whatever. I can't even say it, the whopper. But it never. I don't think he ever says that his hands or his wrists or whatever were nailed. So I don't
know. Concerning the gardener and the thief, differences there. I was wondering, was she looking at him, not knowing he was Yeshua, but thinking that he was the thief that took Yeshua's body? Is that why it says thief?
Yes.
Yeah, but in both accounts, I have to look at it again, but it seems like in both accounts, whether he was the gardener or the thief, she felt that he was responsible somehow for removing his body. Even the gardener would have overseen it. So, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I've heard some other interpretations of that whole thing as far as the gardener, where they say maybe Yeshua was holding sheaves in his hand because, on that day of first fruits, you would present, wave the sheaves or whatever, and people were kind of saying that it might have been a person that had sheaves in his hand, and that's why she thought he was the gardener. But it makes total sense that the gardener would have had something to do with the grounds or messed with the body or something like that. But I think the word thief being in there, it kind of makes a lot of sense, especially with how she leads up to it.
So now that we have solved the issue of Yahusha's Yahusha having shaven his head and his beard, now that word is on the street that Mel Gibson is making a sequel to Passion of the Christ, I feel like we need to write him and tell him that we have solved the issue of his his that he needs to be shaven in the movie. But
it's speculation.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't think the Catholic Church is going to go for that.
Yeah.
And speaking for the Catholic Church, I just realized on the verse 23, because I kind of, since we kind of all start reading the scriptures, I start to see everything to explain it on how can we move from the traditional way which led us to away from the Torah, and it mentions and whosoever you will let go the iniquities, they will be let go for them, but whosoever you will retain the iniquities, they will be retained for them. Now, we know that it says this to his disciples, and we know that Yeshua's disciples, they were actually priests. And I kind of understand, this is my kind of speculation, I kind of understand how the current Catholic and Orthodox Church, they want people to tell the sins to the priest, and then the priest will forgive them. Does that make sense? But I think Yeshua here means that, and I think Yeshua refers not only to his disciples, which are priests, but he also mentions that as a general teaching that every one of us, we need to forgive others, rather than just putting that duty to a priesthood of sorts. Does that make sense?
Well, so this last, I think it was August, Rob and Michael were there. We did a baptism event. Dave did one in New Hampshire, and then Hank did one in Washington. And I'm not sure if anyone else was in the room that hosted it. But the big talk I gave for that event is that we are all intended to be priests in the kingdom. And so, yeah, so anyone who is grafted in, who is a believer, who has crossed over, who's a Hebrew, you just fill in the blank. We are priests. That's my conclusion. And 2 years ago, when I baptized a group of people, they came over to my house afterwards, and I kind of like deputized them. I'm like, okay, so I've baptized you. Now you guys are to go out and baptize. And they're like, huh? Like they were kind of like, some of them were kind of new in the faith. Not all of them, but a few of them were. And I was like, yeah, like you guys, like you don't have to be a seminary student. You don't have to have a degree. You are a priest in the kingdom. You can go out and baptize now. And so it's the same thing with the forgiveness. Yes, we do not need to go to a priest, and confess our sins to be forgiven, right? Like we are that. We are that third party, I guess you could say, right? We can go directly to the Father.
Yeah.
For all those things.
No, actually, that yours explanation, it's a better explanation, I think, because you're actually implying that everyone becomes a priest, which actually is the original purpose, maybe, in our lives, as we discussed with Paul the other day. Was it on Thursday? So yeah, actually, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, like give you another example. I'm going to drop another shock bomb tonight, and I've been saying this for like the last year now. Is that my wife and I are getting a divorce, and I'll probably there's like by a few of you, but we love each other. We have been married for 20 years now. She's actually pregnant with our next child, but we're actually divorcing the state. And we got married in Las Vegas. We eloped at 3:30 in the morning in Vegas. We are divorcing the state of Nevada. We do not want to have a contract with them. We don't want them to have any authority or sponsorship over our children. And so people like freak out when I say that, but it's like, are we going to go to a priest after this? A person with a degree who is, given the authority by the state of such and such? Of course not. No, we're not going to do that. Like it never says that in Scripture. Like what I love, my favorite passage is in Genesis, where the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, and it tells you like. how it was done. Like it's a really great, he just basically they make a covenant between or contract, whatever, all parties are in agreement, both fathers, mothers, the husband, the wife, and they go into the tent. And so like we'll probably have like a little, we're not going to have a ceremony. We're going to, go to another trusted brother and a couple witnesses, and we're just going to, seal it again. But what I'm saying is that it could be anybody. Like it doesn't have to be. We're not going to some priest or holy man to quote unquote marry us. Like we have been given. What I'm saying here is that as kingdom priests, we have been given this authority to baptize people, to marry people, to forgive sins, all that stuff. So.
Good thing you explained, because my heart would just went out on my feet and then came back again. Okay, thank you.
That's a pretty intense. That's a pretty intense photo you have, picture, or I should say, composite image that you have there, Rob, of being baptized by Yahusha and coming out of the water.
Yeah, it's me.
I didn't know that's Rob.
So because someone mentioned about not shaving your head as a priest or whatever, I went to the scripture, and as I was reading, I saw this in Leviticus. It says, and the high priest among his brothers on whose head the anointing oil was poured and who is ordained to wear the garments does not unbind his head nor tear his garments. So he actually would have a head covering on. That says unbind his head, but in the other version it says cover, what's it say? And that is consecrated to put on the garments shall not uncover his head nor rend his clothes.
Yep.
But I mean, that was in the Levitical teaching, so I don't know. I know when we're in Corinthians and it says, that Yahweh is the glory of Yahusha, the man is the glory of, the other way around. Yahusha is the glory of Yah, man is the glory of Yahusha, and woman is the glory of man. So when they're teaching about head coverings kind of thing, I don't know if that means Yahusha, as the high priest, hearkening back to this verse, means he would or wouldn't be head covered. I don't know.
Yeah, it's something to think about, because from what we read in Scripture, that Yahusha is never mentioned to be wearing any kind of head covering. So, good thought.
That was me who put that Leviticus verse. What do you think about that, Rob? I guess I can read it here. So speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, and it keeps going, and then number 5, they shall not make any bald place on their heads, nor shall they shave the edge of their beards. Obviously he's not a Levite, but there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of things that Levite things.
Well, I don't know if that stays in context. If you go to verse 1, it says for the dead. I don't know if that is within that same context or if that's a separate command. It's kind of confusing.
Well, I would see that as, you're not going to shave your head unless you're being gone through some of those certain circumstances that are being mentioned. If they're a Nazarite, and the vow's broken or anything like that. So, I don't foresee a priest being bald for any reason. It's just when the baldness only comes when there is a cleansing that's happening or needing to be happen. That's all. It's not like they're meant to be bald or stay bald, or I would have to presume that in the theory of, if for whatever reason, if Yeshua was bald for whatever reason, that he would then grow the hair out afterwards. Not to say that he would stay that way. So that's my
Right, like it's done at the beginning in ordination as they coming in, fully clean, almost like, oh, you're in your new body kind of thing. And then after that, you wouldn't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Just thought.
And let me just clarify, because I feel like tonight, if there's like a greatest hits video that's ever made of the things that I say that are skewed out of context, I just want to clarify that I am not implying that that we can forgive people of their sins. I was specifically stressing that we do not need to go to a priest to have our sins forgiven. We are priests in the kingdom. So that's I don't know how. I'll have to play back my recording and hear what I said. So
Yeah, it says you're supposed to confess your sins one to another so that you will be healed. So I don't know if that means you're supposed to go and confess to the person you offended, or you're supposed to kind of like say it out loud and get it off your chest to someone so that they can pray for you, and that it's, it's a step of faith, or both, or what?
I think it's in the context, and anyone jump in here, that you're forgiving someone's sins. You're forgiving the sins they had against you. You're not forgiving their sins for their sins to whoever and whatever, but you're forgiving the sins that they transgressed against you. And then obviously you would ask for forgiveness of your own sins to the Father, and you would also confess your sins to your brother.
And also, I think there is the purpose. I think it's mentioned somewhere in the scripture. I don't remember the verse exactly, but I think it mentions the scripture that if we don't forgive others, so there are two ways of forgiving. There are two parts of it. The first part is that we ask forgiveness from Yah to forgive us in the name of Yeshua, which he sacrificed for us. And I think the second part is to actually forgive others ourselves for their own sins. For example, if a person does us some wrong, we forgive them. And it mentioned in the scripture somewhere that if we don't forgive others and we judge them, then we will be judged harshly ourselves when in the judgment day. So that's why I think there are two aspects in the forgiving part. First, we forgive others ourselves, and then we ask for forgive them for them, the name of Yeshua. Not sure if that makes sense.
And Michael, can you mention what you mean by pardon? Where are you pulling that from?
I just looked up the Strong's for forgive in Hebrew, and it also mentions pardon. So I thought that was really interesting, considering our courtroom analogies we've been always
true. Yes.
Speaking of, so it kind of links to the priest and the judge.
Right. Well, that's
in the kingdom.
Right. And I go back to this, that the word, I can't stand, like, talk about another weaponized word is judge or judgment. And when I hear people saying that, I don't judge anybody, it's like, I've actually said this to people. One person I was having a discussion with about the Bible, and they're like, well, my God doesn't judge, and I would never judge another person. I don't even, this one woman said, I don't even notice if they're black or white or not. I don't even notice their nationality because I don't judge them. And I just said, like, I'm afraid to drive on the road with you if you can't even judge a green light or a stop sign. Like, a certain degree, we have to, like, judge, right? We make judgments every single day of our lives. And forgiving someone is also passing a judgment. It is, I think that is accurate. We are pardoning someone. We are saying, I forgive you for your offense. I pardon you of your offense. It is no longer held against you. And so I would agree with that.
We are to judge righteously, right? It says judge righteously. Right. So we have, everything's a judgment. You've got to make decisions. Discernment, judgment, it's kind of the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of those big, I use this phrase a lot, but it's one of those big cognitive dissonance issues where everybody does judge. Most people pretend like they don't because it's fashionable spiritually not to today. But yeah, we all have to judge. And really what it's saying in scripture is that we will be judged according to the standard we hold to other people, I think. I mean, that's how I read it. Like, really, Noel, you're judging that person like that? Okay, well, we'll see how that turns around on you. So,
Well, yeah, that goes.
I just wanted to say that.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was just gonna say I was talking about it, the only unpardonable sin is blaspheming the Ruach. Yeshua's forgiving us, if we aren't blaspheming it. It just hit me like that's another level to what he does. He's gonna forgive our sins.
Like, don't talk bad about my mama.
Also pardon.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it goes back to honor my father and mother. You guys better do it too.
all right, guys. Well, it is 11 o'clock, or 3 minutes shy of 11 o'clock, and it's been a great discussion tonight. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for all your input afterwards, and I learned things from you guys too. I just want to remind everybody that I'm just searching this stuff out like you guys are, and I always respect a person considerably when they have a different view than me, and they approach me with it and be like, hey, what do you think about this or whatever? Versus someone who just has to be right all the time and, Noel's wrong about this, I'm going to prove, that kind of stuff. But this has been a great discussion. I learned from you guys. Thank you, Rob and Michael, for a great conversation tonight. It feels really good to have a book under our belt now, and something to put on our resume. And but it feels really good to feel like we accomplished something. And so I'm going out on a high note tonight. And shalom, everybody. You guys can continue talking and as long as you'd like, and we'll do this again next week.
Shalom.
Shalom, Noel.
Shalom, Noel. Thank you.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.